rebel force has penetrated the shield and landed on Endor.
This is where the fun begins.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
This is Rebel Force Radio.
Your source for the Force.
Star Wars news and commentary.
With Jason Swank and Jimmy Mack.
I've seen Star Wars 500 times.
Star Wars #1!
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Now it's time for Rebel Force Radio.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Boy, do we have the antidote for you this week. What a show we have coming up. This is perfect timing because there's pockets of fandom that have never been more cynical. We've even got the media chirping in. A lot of it very inside and insular, but what's wrong with Star Wars? Toxic Star Wars. The problem with Star Wars fans. What's wrong with Star Wars fans? How do we fix Star Wars? These are the kinds of headlines that we're seeing. And it's getting old. And we've got like I say, a great antidote coming up this week. You're going to love it. We'll save it for just a couple of minutes. Save the surprise. But first, joining me, as always, my good friend and yours from Chicago, yes. Jimmy Mack.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Star Wars fans. How's everyone doing this week? I think everyone's doing really good and looking forward to a new episode of Rebel Force Radio dropping in during the summertime. Star Wars is always about the summertime, in my opinion. Solo, still out in the theaters. I'm excited because it's shown up now in the $5 theater here in my neighborhood, just 2 blocks away. So any given moment in the day, I can just get up and cruise, walk a block and a half, and boom, I'm in the theater eating popcorn, watching the latest Star Wars film. And that, to me, is what summertime is all about. So take advantage and see Solo in the theaters if you haven't yet. And I feel really weird on a Star Wars podcast saying, if you haven't seen it yet, like 3 weeks after its release. But that is the case. You know, some people still haven't gotten around to it. Real hardcore Star Wars fans that I've grown up with are just now going out to see Solo. And
because it's $5?
Well, no, I don't think that's it. It is still playing in most major theaters as well, like your big chains like AMC, etc. It's mostly unavailable on IMAX at this point, but there still may be a few screens dotting around in your local area where IMAX could be still available. But for the most part, it's been brushed aside for the Incredibles sequel, of course, and then we have Jurassic World coming out this weekend.
Yeah, it's a crowded field.
It's a crowded field. So Solo's moving further and further down on the old totem pole, but I'm excited that I have the opportunity to see it in the classic old neighborhood theater just around the corner from my house. So
you just like the idea that you could walk there at any time.
Exactly.
And plop down and see Star Wars. I mean, it's a... You do live in Mayberry, you know. I've said that before. But
we've been told that, yeah. It is Mayberry. For as urban as an area it is, it still has a small town charm to it.
It's an urban Mayberry.
It's a very urban Mayberry, yeah. But
does that make you Otis, by the way?
Oh, you know it, pal. You should see me walking the dog sometimes late at night.
I was going to say... Well, anyway, yeah. So, we are delighted you could be with us here on Rebel Force Radio for this week's show, June 22nd, 2018. So, yeah, certainly it's officially summer. And we just, by the way, happy Father's Day, belated Father's Day to all you dads from last week. I had a great Father's Day.
Did you?
We went to the we just went up to the zoo.
Nice.
Where my wife works. There's one cool thing about my wife works at a zoo. I work at a performing arts center, and the kind of the cool thing about it is a lot of times you wouldn't want to spend your day off at the place where you work, but we don't mind.
No.
So that the day off at where my wife works is a day off at the zoo. Who doesn't love the zoo? So we took the kids, we met up with some friends, and we went to the zoo, had a good day there. They surprised me in the morning. You know what they got me? This is the test when you know you're getting old.
What's this?
And as much as I wanted to be kind of depressed about it, I still really loved it. They got me a new chair.
Oh,
you know when you get a chair?
What a great Father's Day gift!
It is, but I can't lie. I mean, there's a part of me that's like, wow, this means the end is near. I think, is that the chair I'm going to die in? You know, those are the things I always think about. But it's a real nice chair to go on the back porch, and it reclines, and it has this great little tray that was an add-on that fits an iPad, an iPhone or a smartphone, and a cup of coffee.
Ooh.
And a martini.
Your world is complete. That is your whole world.
I literally could stay there all day. I mean, that's morning to night, right?
You got a lot of work ahead of you sitting in that chair.
And of course, the kids, they drew all kinds of great pictures and all kinds of homemade stuff. And I remember doing that for my mom and my grandma and stuff, and they would just go crazy over it. And part of me thought, this isn't as good as if I went out to the store and bought you something. But then when you become a parent, you realize that is the cool stuff, the stuff that they make and they put. Like my daughter made me into a paper doll. It's amazing. I got to post a picture of it because anytime you cannot make a caricature of me because I look like a caricature.
A paper
You know what I'm
doll.
saying? So
this is fantastic. A paper doll of Jason Swank. We have to scan this and put it up on the Rebel Force Radio website so listeners can download it and have their own flat Jason.
But it's a paper doll, not a voodoo doll. So those of you haters out there, don't get any ideas.
Put it on the dartboard.
Right? Yeah, right.
Well, my kid surprised me with a Star Wars gift, and that rarely happens because my Star Wars collection is immense and massive, and my book collection is also, my library is very vibrant and filled and complete. But they found one I didn't have from 1997, the Shadows of the Empire Official Strategy Guide.
Oh, that's a great. Would they get that at a used place? Or?
Found it at the secondhand books.
It's got Shizor on the cover. Right? I can still see it.
Yes.
It's a paperback, kind of oversized book,
compatible with the N64. Which we have one humming here in the Rebel Force Radio basement. So, yeah, I'm going to have to sit down and revisit that game. Cool. That was a great time when that whole series launched, The Shadows of the Empire. It was all the marketing for a movie.
Yep.
Without the movie.
Yeah.
So you had the video game, you had the comic book, you had the novel, the action figures, even a soundtrack, but no film.
Right. Yep.
Genius.
It really was. I remember when all that hype and that hoopla was out, and at the time I thought, and maybe even Lucasfilm thought that was sort of the future of Star Wars. George might have thought, well, you can do these kind of big multimedia rollouts and really diversify, not to get too business about it, but obviously it was a business decision, diversify all the revenue streams. You got video game, you got music, you got a tie-in book, you got all these different, you got a magazine and all this stuff. And, but you don't have the expense and the overhead of a movie. It was really, like you say, it was pretty genius. I remember because that movie. When did that book come out? That came out in
96.
All right, 96. So I had just graduated from high school, and I could not afford the hardback book. Honestly,
I know. I don't mean to laugh. We've all been there.
Right. I could not afford it, and I remember waiting. Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm. I remember waiting for the paperback to come out, which seemed like an eternity, so I could buy it for like $6. Back then, paperbacks were like $4.95, $5.95, and I devoured that. In fact, we did a thanks to you, Jim, we did a kind of a random Ask Me Anything on our unofficial Rebel Force Radio Facebook group last night, and someone asked me, outside of the novelizations, which folks know I'm a fan of. What's your favorite? And Plagueis. So they eliminated everything I've ever talked about on the show, essentially. They said, outside of the novelizations and Darth Plagueis, what's your favorite Star Wars novel? Yeah. And I said, I got to say Shadows of the Empire, because, and is it technically the greatest book? No, but reading that that story between Empire and Jedi, and it was hearing about Leia pining for Han and wondering what's going on with Han, and Han's a slab on the wall, and then she's got this kind of like Han light character that comes into her life, and then she's got the kind of the creepy thing going on with Shizor, and Luke's trying to find himself, and he's teaming up with Lando. It's so much fun. So much fun.
And I believe that they were tossing around during the development of Episode 7, which was eventually named The Force Awakens. They were tossing around as an early sort of prototype title for Episode 7. They were kicking around Shadow of the Empire. Shadow of the Empire. But I think at the end of the day, it would have just been too confusing for them to release a film called Shadow of the Empire when you have this multimedia event from the 90s, still fresh in most fans' minds who were around at that time, even if they weren't. I think that would just cause a little bit too much confusion.
One might argue that the First Order is just a shadow of the Empire.
Right. Well, I guess that's why they came up with the title. And then somebody told JJ, you have to think of something else, pal. I'm just glad they put Force in the title, because that's something I always wanted, was a Star Wars film with Force in the title. Yeah. I don't necessarily like how it goes from Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, Episode 7, The Force Awakens, Episode 8, The Last Jedi. Well, didn't you just say like 2 episodes ago the Jedi were returning? What? So... But that's a bigger hole to dig some other time. But
it is.
That's real nitpicky stuff. But you know what I'm saying? I when they announced Revenge of the Sith is the name of Episode 3, it almost seemed like everyone said, yes, of course.
Right.
What a perfect title. Yeah. And I thought The Force Awakens was pretty good, too. I really did.
I'll be honest with you. Every title, with the exception of Revenge of the Sith, had to grow on me.
Yeah.
In fact, I can remember sitting right here in the very chair I'm sitting in when they rolled out the title for The Force Awakens. And Jim, we were saying, because there was a lot of criticism about it at the time, and we said, you know what? In a couple of years, it's just going to roll off your tongue. Like Empire Strikes Back. We'll call it TFA. And that's what everybody does. Eventually it becomes part of the lexicon, and it does. And even Last Jedi, as divisive as it has become, it's TFA, TLJ.
Yes. That's why it's important to always be open-minded about this stuff and let it sink in, before you start making all these rash assumptions about the direction that the mythology is heading or all the pet.
Well, we are going to talk about that. I mentioned at the top of the show that we've got the antidote for those of you, and I include myself, that are kind of a little weary of some of the drama that's going on within fandom. But what kind of a show would we be that covers what's happening on screen and off screen if we didn't talk about it? It is important to talk about, but it's also important to talk about other things. So we will be talking about the future of Star Wars and the latest fan community meltdowns that are happening on. We've got some headlines, some news about the Boba Fett film, and actually the next several years of Star Wars films. Some of that information is starting to leak out. But first, we've got to bring back a guest. We get to bring back a guest that has been requested ever since he made his debut appearance here on Rebel Force Radio to break down The Last Jedi. Jim, this is a very close personal friend of yours, and he's become sort of mythological himself here at Rebel Force Radio, and his reputation, because he just kind of dropped in, laid a bunch of insane, crazy knowledge on us, and then just vanished.
Like a Jedi ghost.
Yes.
But he's not a ghost. He's here in person. He's the Jedi yogi, John Marcoux. John,
yes.
Welcome back to Rebel Force Radio.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yes.
One of my favorite places to be. in the universe.
Absolutely. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with John Marcoux, he last joined us in January and gave us the mythological blueprint of Luke Skywalker as seen in The Last Jedi. Now, people are wondering, well, what qualifies you, sir, as someone who can provide this sort of breakdown? But I'll tell you what, I've listened to John talk for a long time. He's a devoted student of Joseph Campbell and other philosophers and authors. He's an author himself, having written Poised to Pummel, the unauthorized illustrated biography of Bruce Lee. And coming soon, John, you have a Bob Marley book on the way. You are a yogi. If you want to stretch out and you're in the Chicago area and you are interested in trying some hot yoga, check out his Chicago studios, 105F. More information at 105F.com. John, you're an attorney, a raconteur. Someone who can really tell a good tale.
Well, I had to look that up. I saw that on the show notes. I'm like, raconteur. I got to look that up. Yeah, see, you can tell anecdotes in a funny and engaging way.
Yeah, that's you, man. And I like to think of Jason and myself as raconteurs ourselves. But you're here, and for starters, welcome. Again.
Yes. That's a great welcome. I feel welcome. Thank you.
Yes. And you have just seen Solo a couple times, right?
2 times. It gets better each time.
Yeah. And I've only seen it twice myself. So we have to go over to the theater here in the Hood and go check it out.
I'm ready.
They have good popcorn there.
I'm ready.
So, well, we're ready for what you have to lay on us. And you have taken extensive notes after seeing Solo, a Star Wars story. And so what's our goal here with this breakdown?
Well, the first time you invited me here, we had just seen The Last Jedi, and as we poured out of the movie theater, all the mythology gushed out of me because, especially towards the end there, I'm just flush in what was going on there with the Buddhist bodhisattva meditation, face off with the god of death, everything. And you said, hey, come on the show and let's talk. And that's how that happened. This Solo movie, it didn't hit me like a bucket of cold water, what the mythologies were when I first saw it. I just loved it and enjoyed it. And I had some ideas that I chased down. I had some suspicions. And then when I went back and saw it the second time, it all clicked in. And so tonight, I'd like to take you through what I think are 3 of the world's great mythologies and how they relate and how they seem to reverberate throughout from the beginning, from the opening frame to the end in Solo.
Perfect.
If you could, because I know that this is sort of your forte is about keeping your mind in a healthy place and really looking towards the positive. Jimmy Mack, he reminds us all the time about a great and often overlooked quote by Qui-Gon Jinn in Episode 1, your focus determines your reality. So with all of the drama within fandom, with all of the drama that media sort of kicked up in the dust storm about Solo, I mean, let's keep in mind, a point to bring out is that for over a year, we have had people in the media tell us what a disaster this Solo movie was going to be, right? It's just the director, the director shakeups, potentially Star Wars fatigue, every reason why this movie was going to fail. And then these same reporters turn around and then start lecturing fans. How dare you? Why have you not gone to see this movie? So it's a very cynical time. So could you maybe just take a moment to sort of center us so that we can be receptive to this conversation?
Right. Well, the focus determines your reality is a line you hear in the yoga world a lot. So that hits me right on the gong.
On the gong.
When by sheer coincidence and great good luck, I was scheduled for a 5-day meditation that immediately preceded and overlapped with the opening of Solo. So I was in a great mind space. And I have a practice of intentionally ignoring all the stuff out there that's being said about an upcoming movie. The last few Star Wars movies, I've walked into the theater like a blank slate. But this time around, I couldn't help it. Wherever I went on the internet or to check my email, there was the negativity that you just described. Mm-hmm. It was everywhere. It was surround sound. And I tried to push it at bay, but it really was everywhere. So when I went to see Solo, the late show, I got to the parking lot early, popped in a meditation CD, blanked out my brain again, and walked into the theater real clear. It was just so pleasant. But after the movie, which I loved, I tuned back in to the what I think was almost shockwaves of negativity. It felt like something had been detonated. I looked at what everything was being said, and I thought, this is all just nonsense. This is self-fulfilling prophecy of pessimism. If you say something's going to suck for a year, guess what?
Yeah, you're laying the foundation. I mean... You know, we saw something similar happen with The Last Jedi because Mark Hamill was very open in media appearances and interviews by saying this is going to shake fandom to the core, this depiction of Luke Skywalker. It's way outside the box from what we saw. So, I mean, he was having people, essentially fandom, brace themselves for what was a drastic change in his character. And then afterwards, he would speak more openly about it and say, that was not my Luke Skywalker, and things of that nature, further driving the point home to people that The Last Jedi was something that might deserve more scrutiny. Because if the actor who had played Luke Skywalker for all these years was not on board with it, then why should fans? And that upset me a great deal, knowing that Mark was not happy with his character in The Last Jedi. Because I still feel very affected by his performance in that film and the Buddhist journey he was on, essentially.
I can imagine... if I were an actor who had to play the role he had to play, since 97% of it was negativity and then it just blah at the very end.
Right.
I mean, great redemption, great ending. It's a great way to go off the stage. But if I had to act that for months and be that negative guy, of course I'd walk away with a ugh. I don't know if I'd go out and talk about it. It feels like poor sportsmanship. But I can imagine as a human who's an actor for a living playing a bummer role and feeling like it was a bummer.
Right on.
Well, and of course, you know, you got to figure this is somebody who naturally, I mean, us as fans thought it too, and regardless of whether Mark will admit it, I'm sure he spent a good portion of the last, 30 some years, nearly 40 years, thinking, you know, what if we did it? What if we got the band back together? What if we did another one of these? And what would my character be like? And how amazing would that be? I can imagine that after all that buildup, you know, I as a fan feel it. You know, I can really look at that movie with two very different, and I, again, don't want to make this about Last Jedi, but I can look at it with two very different sets of eyes. And on the one hand, I can appreciate it very much for what it is, but there's always going to be that part of me as the fan that goes, but what if? And why couldn't we see Luke, you know, really be the hero? And anybody who wants to hear John's incredible breakdown of The Last Jedi, go back to that episode. It was January 2018. Jim, I don't know if you happen to have the date of that particular episode. But you can probably just search on rebelforceradio.com, look for John's name, John Marcoux, and you can find that episode. But I'm sure that there are people out there, John, that are like, well, wait. I can understand these guys having somebody like John on for a Star Wars film that really deals deep and heavy into the Force. But come on, this is Han Solo. He's like the opposite of the Force. You know, he's Mr. Cynic. You know, he's Mr. Real World Cynicism. He is that bucket of cold water you were referring to that kind of wakes us up from all the dreamy Force stuff in the movies. But you're breaking this character down in a way that I've never heard before.
Well, because he's not into the Force doesn't mean he doesn't have his own mythology. His hero journey is just different than Luke Skywalker's.
Right. You don't have to be mystical to go onto a hero's journey.
Hear.
All right, so tell us about Han Solo's journey from when we first meet him in the film, because I'm assuming you're kind of taking this chronologically.
I was going to do this chronologically, but then it just occurred to me that there are 3 overarching mythological themes that run through the whole movie simultaneously. So I thought I would take it down one mythology at a time, and in that mythological discussion, take it through the movie.
Yeah,
okay,
lay
great.
it on us.
So what's the first mythological connection you made?
Okay, so the first one, it was the opening image of the movie. It was also the closing image of the movie. I'll tell you about that in a few. But Han Solo is a Promethean figure. He is like the ancient character, a god, an immortal from Greek literature, Prometheus. Like Han, he's a smuggler who stole fire to help humanity. He's first mentioned 700 BC by Hesiod. The name Prometheus translates to forethought. He can see into the future. He also knows the terrors of foresight. So what he did for humanity is he removed the ability to see how you were going to die and allowed hope to sneak in and give you the idea that there's still possibility. This is a life worth living. So how is Han like Prometheus? The major story of Prometheus has several beats. Let me take you through them. The first thing that happens is he tries to trick Zeus at the sacrificial altar. He sets up 2 piles at the sacrifice. One's a very good-looking pile. It's covered with glistening fat, which back then was considered, if you had any, you were wealthy and it was good for you. But the fat just covered all these inedible bones. The other pile looked repulsive. I think he put the cow's stomach or something on top. But it hid all of the choice meats, all the choice cuts. And he said to Zeus, here's the sacrifice, pick a pile. Now, Zeus knew what was going on. He didn't exactly get tricked. And he picked the glistening fat with the bones underneath. And he used it as an excuse to punish Prometheus. First of all, let me just say what that trick was in relation to Han. Han does trick Dryden and Beckett with a quote-unquote fake load of coaxium at the very end of the movie.
Yes.
So they're both tricksters. Prometheus and Han are tricksters. That's the first point I want to make. The second point is when Zeus does a penalty, he deprives humanity of fire. He basically says, okay, you can have your meat, but you got to eat it raw because I'm not going to let you have fire to cook your meat. So, so Prometheus storms the heavens, steals fire, smuggles it back to humans. The old myths, they have 3 possible sources. You know, the poets back then, they didn't really work out the details together too much. One of them has him going into Zeus's palace while he's having a party, going over to the fireplace and stealing it from Zeus's fire. Another tale tells of him sneaking into the workshop of Hephaestus, the god of fire, and a smith. Another one said he went up into the sky and grabbed a burning chunk from Helios's flaming chariot. He basically stole the fire from the sun. And the great playwright Aeschylus said that he stole the flowery splendor of fire. And in a similar way, Han has stolen the unrefined coaxium from the mines, and those are analogous to Hephaestus' underground smith shop.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now,
right.
Now, the way he does it, he storms in and he zips out. Prometheus is considered one of the great heroes because unlike, say, for instance, Odysseus, who has to travel for 10 years, bouncing around through all kinds of monsters to finally get his mission done, the superior hero sees what he wants, zips in, grabs it, zips out. He's the man. And Han does the same thing. With L3's navigational assistance, he covers the run in under 12 parsecs when you round it down.
This is true. So there's your connection to ancient Greek mythology.
Well, it goes a little further because not only is that a Promethean feat, he should brag a little bit about the achievement, doing it in 12 parsecs. The smuggling of the coaxium to the rebel force is equivalent to Prometheus' stealing of the fire to give the humanity. They're both considered champions of a good service to humankind. They use their intelligence and craftiness to help society literally survive. And at the very end of the movie, Enfys Nest tells Han what these 60 million units of coaxium means. It gives life to a rebellion. That's a quote.
Yes. Yes.
And one of the best things I liked about the way he smuggled it, the way Han played out that he was a trickster, he used a trick, a ruse like the Emperor wears no clothes. He opened the box and showed the coaxium, and they didn't believe it because he had already faked out Beckett a few minutes earlier. He got them to believe it wasn't it, even though it was the real stuff. That was so cool.
Let me ask you this. So the coaxium, because it was unrefined, had a very strict expiration date. Okay? If you want to compare Han with the coaxium to Prometheus with the fire, is there a similar situation where the flame was going to go out and he had to get it from point A to point B quickly? Or is that just...
Yeah, if Zeus caught a wind of him, he was going to throw a thunderbolt and the mission would have been over lickety-split.
Okay, so he was up against the clock being Zeus's knowledge of what he was up to.
Virtual omniscience, not total omniscience of what's going on in the universe.
Okay,
and
okay.
And by the way, this fire theft, this is a global, and in most cultures, there's somebody stealing a fire. There's, in Hawaii, Maui stole fire from the goddess Mahui Ike,
yes,
who lived in the underworld and hid secret of combustion in her fingernails. And he went down there and got it, like he was stealing the secret recipe from the colonel. In the Bushmen of Africa, they report praying mantis stole it from the ostrich. And the Maidu Indians of California say the mouse stole it from thunder and brought it to mankind hidden in a flute, which is the same kind of way that Prometheus hid fire in some dried fennel, a stalk of fennel.
Wow. And then, of course, if you... look at more modern storytelling, Robin Hood, he stole from the rich and gave to the poor. So there's always that indelible quality heroes have that make them charitable, that make them the hero of the underdog, is because they do things that eventually will benefit that underdog.
Not necessarily, but in this case for sure.
Okay.
And incredibly, this is one of the few instances where we have Joseph Campbell himself talking about Star Wars, talking about Han Solo. He said, and I quote, "Solo was a very practical guy, at least as he thought of himself, a materialist. But he was a compassionate human being at the same time and didn't know it. The adventure evoked a quality of his character he didn't know he possessed. And so living the life evokes, are you a good guy or are you a bad guy? It's in the pudding. It's in what you do, not what you say." So
yeah, I thought that was, and I've mentioned this on the show probably every time we've talked about Solo, that to me one of the more compelling moments of the film is when Kira tells Han something that, this is a guy that sort of at least parades around like he knows himself better than anybody does. And yet she looks at him and tells him, "I know who you are. You're the good guy." And he doesn't. You get the sense that he doesn't want to be the good guy. He wants to be the scoundrel. He wants to be the hotshot pilot. He wants to be the guy who's, pulling one over on somebody else. But she calls him out for what he is, and that's of course the Han that later develops into the original trilogy.
Now, she's a fascinating character in the movie, and mythologically, she is not who you think she is. A lot of people, if you asked, I bet you would say she's the love interest in the movie, but she is not. And the end of the Promethean story, and the Prometheus story, rather, indicates maybe who she is. So, okay, just to recap. Trickster, Prometheus, pulls this trick on the sacrificial altar. Zeus retaliates, takes fire away. Prometheus sneaks in, steals the fire back, gives it to humanity, and now Zeus retaliates, both against Prometheus and humanity. So to Prometheus, he sentences him to eternal torment, which in this case, he chains him to a rock, and an eagle eats his liver every day. But because he's immortal, his liver regenerates every night. This goes on for 30,000 years, according to some of the poets, until Hercules comes along and breaks the chains.
Now, there's been some weekends where I think my liver has also regenerated itself overnight.
But thank God.
But look at the mythological blueprint here. He sentences him to eternal torment. The liver eating is just the details. Han, too, a little bit later, is sentenced to eternal torment, carbon froze. Until, like Heracles, Leia comes along and frees him.
Yes.
But not only does Zeus retaliate him, Zeus retaliates against humanity by creating Pandora. Hephaestus sculpts a lovely girl out of earth and water, makes the clay. Athena dresses her and puts the jewelry on her. Aphrodite gives her grace and charm and ravenous lust. Hermes teaches her how to lie, flattery, seduce, be treacherous, and shamelessness. So she's a player, Pandora. Four winds breathe life into her, and then they give her a box. That's what her name means, Pandora, all gifts. In the box are all gifts, which is not actually what's in there. It's the box of all the troubles of mankind, pain, evil, diseases, misery, and woe. Kira is a Pandora figure. I mean, she's just straight up gangster by the end, right? She sits. She's the right-hand Sith. But throughout the movie, if you watch the movie and check her, each time along the way, either she's doing something increasingly showing you that she fits all these Pandora indicators. And sometimes they don't even show you what she does. Like behind a closed door, you can see through a small window. She just unloads on somebody and the door opens and L3 says, "What was that? I've never seen that before. What do you call that?" I mean, she's hardcore, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
so if she's not the love interest.
No.
So Han doesn't have a love interest in this film.
No. Actually, my image right now, my feeling about the Solo movie, the best part about it is the love story, but it's not Kira. I'm going to tell you about that in one of the other myths.
Oh God, it's not L3, is it?
I know. I was going to say it's Chewie.
But let me tell you about this sweet, beautiful tension that I detected between Han and Kira, because obviously now she's different. And he's not really picking up on that, or he doesn't want to believe it, or something's going on. We'll talk about that in a bit. But when all of the woes that have escaped Pandora's box, when the lid was opened and it swarmed over the earth and started causing suffering to everybody, one creature stayed in the box and got caught underneath the heavy lid. And that's hope. Optimism and hope. Han is teeming with optimism. We're going to talk about that in a minute. That's the next myth. But she has so little hope that she actually savors. She's nostalgic for Han and that way of thinking and that way of living. And that's really the nature of their relationship is that. But it's hanging by a thread because she's got to do what she's got to do.
So where do you stand? I guess it's somewhat obvious, but one of the questions when you leave the movie is, was she trying to protect Han? Was she just in it for herself? Or did she find a happy medium, and was she just lucky that she found a solution that did both?
Yep.
Protected.
I think she did both. I mean, I think she would have protected Han to a point. And she actually, I mean, look how she took out Dryden Voss at the end, right? She actually took Han down with ease. She looked like a ninja. And then she, of course, she lived. But I don't know if that would hold up in future. I mean, she did what she could, but I mean, in other circumstances, it might not work out so well.
Yeah, she's gonna choose number one when the hits the fan.
As others in the movie said, she's a survivor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the last thing I just want to say about the Promethean fire in Solo.
Yeah.
The way you can detect it. Okay. Hollywood has embraced Joseph Campbell, the adventure, the hero's journey, the whole thing, and in many ways they've codified it. It's part of their vocabulary, and there are certain beats that you can look for in movies to see certain things. And one of the most important things modern movie makers do is they very consciously select what the very opening image is, the very opening frame, and the very last frame, because those are the beginning and ending points, and the hero's arc stretches between those two. You see where the hero was at the first image, and then the last image indicates where the hero has gone to. Where's the transformation? What has happened in the meantime? Where'd the movie take you? And so in the Solo movie, the opening image is a spark in the dark. You hear it, zzz, zzz, And then a few seconds later, you start putting it together that somebody's trying to hotwire a car and make an escape. But the opening image is a spark in the dark, looking for fire. And then the final image is Han, Chewie, and the Falcon jumping to light speed. Then credits. So you see Han looking for a spark, looking for some fire. And at the end, he's got his fire.
Wow. So what great bookends, actually, for, to complete his story.
For people of the ilk that are working on screenwriting and producing Star Wars movies, this is unmistakably Promethean imagery. They knew what they were doing, and the reason I picked this mythology first, Prometheus, is because the makers chose to open and close with it, and it fits everything else.
The thing I want to pick up on is this idea, and we were talking a little bit about it off air, is calling Han Solo the optimist, because we have referred to him many times here on this show over the years as the real world cynic. He provided that dose of reality in this fantastical galaxy. He was sort of the everyman. He was there to sort of translate for us what was going on in the Star Wars universe. And that seemed to sort of create this cynic image of Han Solo, the guy that's been from one end of the galaxy to the other and never seen anything, like the Force and all of that. But you're coming away saying that this guy is an incurable optimist.
In this movie, in Solo, he is an optimist who's apprenticing under Beckett, who's the cynic who he will later become. So if you listen to what Beckett's saying, Solo in later movies will echo that, because that's just, if you're going to be a smuggler, look, there's some hard rules you got to live by, right? So there's a mix. But as a kid, as a coming-of-age guy trying to make it in the business of smuggling, I counted a long parade of Han Solo optimisms, with one glaring exception. Han Solo, everything he says in the movie is optimistic, and in a few minutes, if you want, I can pull it as a stunt. I can reel off all these optimistic things, but in the greater space of world mythology, he's his character in this movie is a reflection of one of the great characters of the Western canon, a character written by Voltaire in what is considered Voltaire's magnum opus, and it's Candide. And the title of the book is Candide, or The Optimist. And it's a short, savagely satirical, and widely banned book, blasting away at everybody, including the church and government. And it takes dead aim at what was a popular philosophy at the time it was written, metaphysical optimism, which Voltaire thought was just incredibly, insanely silly in the face of all the widespread suffering going on in Europe at the time. So he just took dead aim, and just once he started swinging, everybody was in his way, and so that means all the powers that be didn't want his book published or read by anybody. But there's a lot of Han and Candide story correlations, and then let's start with that. Let's do it.
Yeah. So you want to walk us through optimistic Han Solo?
Yes. First I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how he relates to Candide, which is not as extensive as how Han related to Prometheus in the last part we talked about. So in the book, Candide is described as a simple young man. He's being taught by, because he's a fancy young lad, he has his own professor, Professor Pangloss, which is one of the great names in literature. And it means everything's great. And he's teaching this optimism, like the world's the best it could possibly be. Enjoy it. Don't worry about anything. Whatever happens, doesn't matter. It's the best that could possibly be.
John, real quick, when did Voltaire, when was he active?
1700s.
1700s, okay. So
before for the Americans listening, before the Declaration of Independence. And so Candide is a simple young man, and he has affections for a young lady Cunegonde. And if you Google Cunegonde, Cunegonde, it's a dirty word in French. Anyway, they're at the beginning.
Anatomy?
Yes.
Anatomy?
Yes. And at the very beginning of the story, you can...
So he's like Ian Fleming, naming these women after body parts.
Yes.
Okay,
You nailed
right.
it. You nailed it,
Okay.
Jason. And just like in the Han, just like Han suffered in Solo, you could see at the very beginning there's something about to happen, and then boom, they're abruptly separated where Candide, the guy, is impressed into the military, just as Han is recruited into the military because he's making the escape. And Cunegonde is yanked into a series of really nasty, nasty adventures. Candide hears that she's dead, and only years and years later, when they run into each other again, he says to her, I heard you were raped and disemboweled. And she said, yeah, people survive these things. Like it wasn't that big of a deal. Because she had also been kidnapped and enslaved by a series of pirate ships. Wow. She was in a plague in a civil war where she was somewhere that was under siege and everybody was suffering from famine. So she had one of her buttocks cut off to feed the military guys. So again, years later they reunite, and obviously, she has no teeth. She's not the same. And yet Candide treats her like they just were separated a couple days ago.
Right.
And in the movie...
So he's still hot. He's still hot for her, even though she's missing a butt cheek and has no teeth.
Yes.
Wow.
And has been...
That's true love.
Has been passed
and been
around.
used by all these pirates.
Sent to the Caribbean and back 40 times. Right.
Wow.
On pirate ships.
Wow.
And Han is on the yacht, and he's told not to talk to anybody. None of these people are your friends. Again, some of the cynicism that Beckett was handing off. And he runs back into Kira. And now, she had her teeth, and boy, did she look good.
Right. And from what I could tell, she had both butt cheeks, too. So.
I did not verify that visually, but maybe on my third watch, I'm going to check that out.
But the scars run deep.
Yeah.
It's not any sort of physical scar or physical transformation she's gone through.
And the screenwriters and producers and the makers of this movie wasted no opportunity to let you know she's not the girl he knew. And to the point where she actually told him, I'm not the girl you knew.
Yeah, right.
So and this guy...
If that wasn't subtle enough for you, yeah.
He keeps on pressing on through, just like Candide. And the second half of the book is Candide's optimism. Gradually and painfully, his eyes are becoming clear to what the real reality is, and it's watching him being broken down like that. And it's
well, before we move any further, you promised us that you would sort of break down some of these lines of dialogue, because I know we've got people in the audience that are going, no, Han Solo's no optimist.
Okay,
even in Solo: A Star Wars Story, he's still the cynical pirate.
Let me tick off a bunch of them, and you see. Let's see what your impression is. Okay. So the opening scene, he has a bad deal, goes bad, and he shows back up to the bosses, Lady Proxima's, and he doesn't have any of the goods in his hand. And watch the way he's optimistically talking himself out. He's like, look, we can fix this. Then, as he's trying to run the speeder to the spaceport to make the escape, he says, we can make it. And Kira says, no, we don't. And at the very end of the alley, his speeder gets squeezed. But again, he was optimistic. He thought, hey, we can do this.
Yeah.
At the security, he tries to bribe the officer, and they show the coaxium, and she says, you could be detained for this. And he says, what good that would do anyone? You know what I mean? Looking a few seconds or minutes into the future, hey, there's a better way. And then when Kira was afraid of actually putting it into the slot and handing over the coaxium to get let through, he kept saying, do it. This is somebody who's saying, let's go. It's going to be all right. At the recruitment, where the guy was sneering at him about what he wants to do, he was like, I want to be a pilot. And he laughed at him. He's like, you know what? It's like saying, I'm 4 foot tall and I want to be in the NBA. The guy's like, yeah, okay. But he was optimistic. When he was petitioning Beckett to go AWOL for the Empire and to join his crew so he can go out and make his money and get a ship and all that, Beckett smashed him in the face how many times? He reports him. He gets sent into the pit. He does everything he can to say, kid, beat it. And he keeps coming at him. We can do this. Around the campfire, when Beckett agrees to bring him in on the next day's heist, he tells the story about the girl back home, and he wants to get some money and buy a ship and go rescue her. And they said, how do you know she's still there? He says, I just know. When the deal goes bad and Beckett's like, I got to go back and answer to my guy, Dryden Voss, he says, you don't have to come with me. Dryden Voss doesn't know you are. He voluntarily submits. Mm-hmm. And he says, I'll do it. And he says, why? He goes, it's worth the risk. If it's for the money, it's worth the risk. I believe optimism is, I believe there's a better future. Let's do this. And that's what he's saying. When he goes up into the yacht and has the negotiations with Dryden, Dryden thinks the negotiation's over. And he's like, oh, boys, he's about to have them all killed. And what happens? Han Solo jumps forward and says, whoa, why don't we find an unrefined source? Hey, work with me here. All we need is a fast ship and a brilliant pilot. You already got the brilliant pilot. Optimism, optimism, optimism. When he goes to Lando's to get the ship, he sees the card game. He thinks he can beat Lando. Optimism. When when he's in Lando's cape closet, which is one of my favorite sets ever, he's entreating Kira. He's saying, hey, let's do this. We can do this. Everything can be fine. She's saying, no, it can't. He keeps saying, yes, it can. When, by the way, when they show up at the planet and go to the mines and she turns Han over, she hands him the golden dice. Do you know as she returns that after years? Did you remember that beat?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
In the background, John Williams' music plays, but they use a child's xylophone to play it. It sounds like it's playing in a crib somewhere. And it's evocative of their past. But again, that's an optimistic moment. When he's trying to escape the maelstrom, you know, the gravity pit with the huge octopus trying to pull them down?
Yeah.
Most people, when the deal goes down, they get pessimistic. They go, oh, where's the escape pod? He's like, let's give it a hot shot. When everything seems lost. By the way, the gravity pit is straight out of Odysseus. That's Charybdis, the powerful whirlpool in the Mediterranean that sucks everything in and vomits it out, destroyed. The ship had to navigate it both going to war and coming back. So Odysseus had to outdo Charybdis twice. Okay, when they're downloading L3 into the computer to try and calculate a faster way back and get out of this mess, he says, I have a really good feeling about this. There's no rational indicators that he should be feeling optimistic about what's about to happen. And yet, just like all the greatest heroes, when the mission seems impossible, when it seems at its darkest, the greatest heroes say, yes, we can. Let me just tick off a few more. When Lando declares after Solo crashes the Millennium Falcon, I never want to see you again. And he starts walking away, Han says, never? And optimists are known to say, all things shall pass. There is no never. You know, this is always an isolated incident. It might be a day, it might be a season, but we'll eventually get over it. That's an optimist. When Kira is telling him, you know, I know who you are, you're the good guy, right before that he says, I can take care of myself. He's looking into the future, and whatever rebel forces are whatever bad forces are out there, it doesn't matter. I can handle them. Let me last few. When he unclicks his holster to fight against the marauders, they all are pointing their guns at him. Who unclicks their gun at that point? It's impossible odds, and yet he thinks he can do it. He tells Beckett his plan. We don't hear it. The camera cuts away for a few. But when they come back, Beckett says, man, that's dicey. I don't know. He thinks there's a positive plan, even when a guy like Beckett says you can't do that. Elevator up to Dryden's yacht for one of the critical scenes. He tells Kira, we're going to win. And she's like, this isn't something you want to lose, dude. But that's what an optimist thinks. An optimistic athlete walks onto the field saying, I'm going to win this game.
Yes. And
when he's fighting with Dryden up in the yacht right before Dryden takes it, he says to Han, you're making a mistake. And he says, it wouldn't be my first. And he's like, yeah, it's going to be your last. And Han says, why so negative? It's a wise-ass comment, but it's an optimist comment. It's not a pessimist comment.
So he does sort of wrap his optimism up with perhaps what we perceive as sarcasm or
cockiness,
cynicism,
arrogance, hubris. Right. But the way you look at it is it's optimism.
Hey, man, when somebody
is it because
says
he believes in himself?
That's certainly part of it. He has a young lad's belief in himself, like that zesty, that gusto, that like you never see a football player walking down the street with his friends after a game, the way the shoulders are back kind of thing. He's got that young man's thing. And he even, the last line in the movie, he ends with optimism. He says to Chewie, when Chewie complains about, hey, we're going to go see this guy about it, we got a gig. He says, when have I ever steered you wrong? Look into the future. It's all going to be good, man. And so you can call Han Solo a pessimist. I'm not going to, there's maybe plenty to talk about there. But in this movie, in Solo, he is an optimist. Every single line he is given, except for one.
Which one?
And it's a key line. It is leaving the poker table for the first time, heading to the impound yard.
After he is lost, with Lando and Kira and Beckett. And as he's walking through what looks like a futuristic version of Sanford and Sons, beat up old beaters, Han says 3 statements in a row. Bam, bam, bam. He says about Lando, he's a hustler. He has no ship. And if he has a ship, it's probably a rust bucket. And then he turns the corner and he sees the Falcon for the first time. And he suffers what is known as aesthetic arrest. When you see, you're a young man and you see the most beautiful girl in the world and you just stop short and your legs freeze. I mean, look, next time you see the movie, watch Han's reaction to seeing the Falcon. And it extends for minutes. He looks like he's grinning ear to ear like he's just been told the love of his life, which it is. The Millennium Falcon is the love story in this movie. Oh, bravo. I thought you were going to say Chewbacca for sure.
No. Although, when I saw Chewbacca air dry, I was like, oh, man, I can see. Let me tell you why that's the love story. Again, remember I told you screenwriters have codified the hero's journey?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. There are certain points in the movie where the love story lands. 1/3 of the way into the movie, 1/2 of the way into the movie, and 2/3 of the way into the movie, there are love interest beats. The 1/3 of the movie is known as the meet cute. This is the part of the movie when a girl's online at the bookstore and she drops her book and leans over, and the guy in front of her leans over and they pick up the book at the same time and they look at each other.
Right, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That happened with Han staring at the Millennium at that exact minute. I mean, I marked down the minute in the movie that it happens, and that's when the love interest is usually introduced. It's called the B story.
Hey, before you move any forward, though, for those keeping score at home, what exactly was the minute? Give us the...
I didn't write them in these notes. We're going to have to post those later. But, okay, let me just say this. In a 90-minute movie, it happens somewhere between the 30 and 34th minute. This movie, I timed. They listed in the newspaper as 2 hours and 15 minutes. But when you time it from the glimmering Lucasfilm image to the first opening credit, it's exactly 2 hours and 5 minutes in, or 125 minutes. So 1/3 of the way in, just about the 42-minute mark. I'm making an estimated guess there. So that's when the love story starts.
Got it.
Now that's the B story. The A story is Han's trying to be free. He's oppressed. He wants to make money. He wants to get a ship, and he wants to be free. And then he meets the B story, the love interest of Millennium Falcon. And they're about to intersect in a few ways because the Falcon is going to become his means for freedom. So at the midpoint, at the halfway movie, this is now officially my favorite part of the movie. It beats Chewie drying off in the air as the ship was flying through the air.
Right.
That was so visually, all my senses felt that. But at the midpoint, and in a 125-minute movie, at 62.5 minutes, like on the money, I mean, they landed this like Kerry Strug. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You could do it! He's in the ship. They're flying away. Lando is taking care of business. Han jumps into the second seat. And his hands reach out. They're cupped as if he was reaching out for a love. And they're hovering millimeters above the handles. And L3 comes in and says, hey, you presumptuous, you know what, get out of there. Who do you think you could fly this thing? And
Get
Han
your
jumps
presumptuous ass out of my seat.
Yes. And it was the near miss. It was the lean in for the kiss when Dad turned on the light. You know what I mean? And said, hey, hey, oh.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah, right.
Okay. The next beat is at the 2/3 mark. This is consummation. So in a 90-minute movie, the Hollywood screenwriters call this sex at 60. This is the 2/3 mark of the movie, and this is when Han actually jumps into the seat and takes off because Lando is too preoccupied grieving over L3 in the other room. So for the 3 traditional beats that Hollywood follows for the love interest, all 3 of those beats are Han sees the Millennium Falcon, Han reaches out to grope the Millennium Falcon, and then Han actually gets to hold the Millennium Falcon.
Now, did he ask the Millennium Falcon's permission first?
L3 just tweeted hashtag me too.
Yeah. All right, so the consummation. And Han has had his kiss
it's his
from
love.
the love of his life, which is not Leia, not Chewie, not Kira, but the Millennium Falcon.
I think so.
Which that really resonates.
This is my thesis, man. This is my thesis, and you can verify it with other points. For instance, at the final card game, they're having a conversation. They're talking smack over the cards. And he's talking in the language that you would talk about stealing another guy's girlfriend. And Lando's a player, so he knows all about this talk. And Han says, "Believe me, it's mutual. She wants to be with me too." And then he wins her. And then he wins her.
And then
he takes off. Wow. He grabs the princess and takes off. The last scene is him and his best friend Chewie and the love of his life. Zoom!
Wow, that's great. That's amazing.
The true love story of Solo, a Star Wars story.
Now it's known.
So John, this relationship, the love of Han's life, when we kind of go outside of this particular film and we go into the original trilogy, this stays consistent because I feel like Han is the type of guy that would not take the risk of really falling in love with another flaky person. In fact, it's Beckett that tells him, just, you know what, assume everybody that you meet is going to betray you at some point, and you'll never be disappointed. So for him to focus his attention, and this is not about, romance, we're speaking metaphorically here, unless you're John Kasdan, and then you never know, it might actually be romance. But if we're looking at just the connection that he has with the ship, what is it? Is it that it's a symbol of his freedom? What's the sort of the foundation of the love between Han and the Falcon?
I think it's got a lot of ingredients. You just named one of the big ones for sure. It's a means for freedom, which he's been dreaming about since he was a little kid. So, I mean, look at what dudes dream about when they're little kids, right? Being baseball stars and having a fancy car and everything. And then dudes when they're later, all right, I missed it, but I can now afford a red convertible. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of stuff that really sticks deep. It's impressed deep at a young age. He said his dad worked at the factory, so as anybody who has worked or gone to the work of their father and looked over their shoulder, there's a romantic attachment. Like maybe I'll do this just like my dad did, or there's probably something embedded deep. I know a lot of guys who grew up and their dads were always in the garage working on their old like '67 Chevy Novas and like juicing them up and everything, and they have that love for those cars still. I think there's and hey, look, Lucas, who originally put this together, just finished American Graffiti. I mean, this guy, you don't have 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon on this one. It's about 2.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And George is a notorious gearhead. He loved to race cars in his youth. He still is very much an aficionado of open wheel racing and Formula One and things of that nature. So his love for cars definitely shone through in both Graffiti and in Star Wars through Han Solo.
But you know what? The freedom idea. But this is my means for freedom. This is my escape pod. This is how I can, like a teenager who gets their license and they get a car, and all of a sudden their zone of freedom, their jurisdiction vastly expands in a minute.
Yes.
That's definitely part of it, and we're going to discuss that in the third and final great world myth that I think ran through Solo.
All right, well, let's jump into it. This is the third mythological element that comes into play in your blueprint for Han Solo.
Right.
So I'm really interested. So we've done ancient Greece.
Yep.
We've done
Renaissance France.
The French Renaissance.
And now we're coming to what the world considers America's contribution to world mythology. Cowboy from the American West. I think
All right.
That was not a recording, by the way. That was an impromptu performance.
That was amazing.
Of Morricone's soundtrack for the spaghetti westerns that Clint Eastwood would star in as the man with no name. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's fantastic. By the way, there's an amazing video that's gone around. It's viral. I don't know the name of the orchestra, but it's a live performance by an incredible orchestra doing that very piece. And it's absolutely fantastic. I've seen it show up on my Facebook feed multiple times, and it's really good because they do all of the all of that vocal work is done by real people. The whistling and all of that. It's none of it was synthed.
All right, well, we'll look for it and we'll put it up on our Facebook page.
Yeah, it's great.
Professional whistling is a great career if you can pull it off. It's one of the few Old West tropes that didn't make it into Han. I mean, maybe I'll go back for a third time and look for a whistler. But before we get into the full mythology and the abstract and the Joseph Campbellians and all that stuff, let's just savor what was so obvious on the surface of the movie, because they're so good at creating this beautiful ecosystem. And in this one, the American West really comes out. You got, for starters, Han's gunslinger outfit. When they're putting together plans for a great train robbery. I mean, come on. My dad, he loved John Wayne, and he had a coffee cup with the great train robbery image on it, and I have that. I drink out of that coffee cup almost every day. I get it. I see this image, and that's what happened when they were trying to steal the coaxium in that first big scene. But when they're sitting around the campfire at night, that's like such an old school, old Western scene. Guys eating the beans. I think in where's the movie where all the guys are sitting around farting?
Is that Blazing Saddles?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Right.
It's that.
It's either that or Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. There's a great campfire in that as well. But yeah, and they're sitting there and they're kind of waxing about all the things that they want to do once the big heist is over, and you've got Beckett who's talking about what was that instrument called that he wanted to learn how to play?
Right. It sounded like an old-timey kind of instrument.
Yeah, exactly. He was going to retire and just sit on the front porch and play this instrument.
It wasn't harpsichord, but it had the same sort of cadence. Dun, 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 something.
Like the vowel accord.
Yeah.
I see what you did there. It's like the vowel accord or something because it was close to Val, who was his squeeze.
Well, when the great train robbery goes wrong, they have a couple of burials out in the desert, and if you've ever seen a movie in the Old West, when somebody dies, there's no funeral home, right? You dig 18 inches right there, and it's over, and hope the buzzards get them after you leave. But they set that up. When they go to negotiate for Lando to fly them, they step off to the side, and Beckett's pouring himself a shot on a bar. I don't know if anybody picked that one up. You got the card game with Lando with all that macho talk, and I think Ace Up a Sleeve was invented in a Western, and those are. A man will get killed if he's hiding an ace up his sleeve. That's all part of that.
Well, of course, Western. The mythology of the Western certainly found its way, seeping into the Star Wars mythology since the beginning. I mean, a lot of people would originally refer to George Lucas's first Star Wars film as a space Western. And you really got that vibe, of course, with the Mos Eisley Cantina standing in for the Old West Saloon, and there's fights at the bar, and gunslingers having showdowns, and all of that.
And nobody's calling 911.
No. This was when justice was served by society. There was no system of balances and checks and balances in place. This was all just being handled right out in the open.
And life out in space is like life on the frontier in the Old West. It's dangerous. Just ask Luke's Uncle Owen.
And of course, this is something the Empire. Yeah, this is something the Empire promotes. You know, this is something they cultivate. They want lawlessness to happen. They want mayhem, anarchy in certain areas of society.
You know, there's some people in the modern times that are trying to do that too.
Yeah.
That they can profit off that.
We often see it playing out on social media. So,
and you know, one of the last little things I saw that felt so Western-like?
What's that?
At the very end of the movie, whoever the beautiful woman is in the movie, they do this like in old-timey Hollywood. They do this like lasting shot where you can't see any pores on the skin of their face. The lighting is perfect, and they're looking off into the future. And at the very end, when Kira's yacht took off and she ditched out, they did this extended shot of her that just reminded me of Elizabeth Taylor and all those old starlets looking at the end of that movie.
Yes, there was certainly an old-school Hollywood appeal to the way Emilia Clarke was portrayed as Kira in this film.
I would love if somebody out there found a picture of Kira at the end and put it side by side with a picture of Elizabeth Taylor at the end of Cleopatra, because I think they stole the exact same shot.
Wow, interesting. That's an interesting perspective.
Okay, so I gave you the surface stuff. This is what it felt like. This was all these indicators of, you know, this is the frontier, this is the West, things are tough. In the excellent book, Jimmy, that you referenced for me and that I picked up a copy of a few years ago, Star Wars, The Magic of Myth.
Yes.
It was in association with a Smithsonian presentation.
That's right, and that it was a touring museum exhibit, Star Wars, The Magic of Myth. And it took all of these great Star Wars costumes and props and artwork, and it went out on display all over the country. It landed here at the Field Museum in Chicago. But what it did was it gave you this very clear lineage, all of the stepping stones that tied in a lot of mythology into Star Wars. And so this was the book that was like the souvenir book on the tour. They actually put out a whole book that you could buy in the gift shop at the end.
Well, it's not just a pretty book. The content is solid. And at several points in the book, they tap into the mythology of the Old West that Lucas was trying to create. Lucas grew up during the golden age of the Westerns and thought about it when he was in college as an anthropology major, and thought about it later in film school and as an aspiring young filmmaker. And he said, quote, "After I finished American Graffiti, I came to realize that since the demise of the Western, there hasn't been much in the mythological fantasy drama. So these are the seed thoughts that brought him to this futuristic cowboy thought. And the Western cowboys have a counterpart in the East, in Japan. The code by which the samurai live is very much like the code by which Western cowboys live. They're really big on freedom and independence. Courage, physical prowess is a must. An innate sense of justice. You don't have to show them a book with laws in it. They know what's right and wrong. And when necessary, the samurai and the cowboy, in a split breath, can unleash instant violence to help dispense the justice which they innately sense. These are also considered quintessential American values to this day. Freedom, independence, courage, physical prowess, justice, and sometimes violence.
Right. Now, how does that tie in with Han's story as we see in Solo?
Okay. Thank you very much. What a great pivot. I'll pay you double.
I do what I can.
So I'm going to skip forward in my notes here a little bit, because I'm going to share with you right now the screenwriter mind trick number 3. So they have 3 Jedi mind tricks. I associate one that they used in this movie with each mythology. Here's the third one. Somewhere in a 90-minute movie, roughly 5 minutes into the movie, sometimes it could be 7, sometimes it could be 2, someone other than the hero says something. It's either they ask a question or they make a statement in a non-obvious, generally conversational way. But later in the movie, it has far-reaching and meaningful impact. You just don't know it. So one of my favorite examples in studying these bits, these Jedi mind tricks of Hollywood, Karate Kid, 1984. Daniel moves with his mom from New Jersey to Los Angeles and moves into this new apartment complex up the stairs. And one of the kids in the other apartment sees him and starts talking to him, and immediately they're pals, and they're hauling boxes up the stairs into the apartment. And the new friend sees Daniel with his hands full and boxes stacked up to his face. And he reaches out with his leg and kicks the door open and says, "Hey, man, that's a good skill. You might need that later." Yeah. Yeah.
What do they call that? Foreshadowing?
Yeah.
Telegraphing?
But
Telegraphing. Yeah.
now that you know it's there, watch for it. In the first few minutes of the movie, it'll just seem like an innocuous statement, and you won't give it two thoughts. In Solo, a few minutes into the movie, when him and Kira are en route to the spaceport making their escape, she says, after the escape, "We won't take orders or be kicked around by anyone." That's the dream, and that's the theme of the movie. That moment is called the cinematic theme. It's placed there on purpose. They try, like a great hunter, how they cover their tracks and drop leaves and rake sand behind them so nobody can see their footprints and stuff. A great screenwriter will put the theme in it, but hide it as best as possible. And I was looking for it, and that one jumped right out at me on the second viewing. As a counterpoint, when we look at Kira later, after years, when Han meets up with her again, she states a theme to her own life, not to the movie. She says, when Han wants to be free, just like she stated at the beginning of the movie, we won't take orders from anybody, we won't get kicked around by anybody. She later opposes something he says and says, well, everybody serves somebody. Everybody serves someone. We live in a universe where the master-servant relationship is the only relationship. It's an unpleasant universe.
True.
Well, I hate to interrupt the conversation because it's going so well. But if I could just take a brief pause and thank our good friends at MeUndies. Now, take a moment to think about your underpants. I know it's a little weird, but your first thought probably isn't, they're awesome. Which is why we want to tell you about MeUndies. They are comfy. They are awesome underpants. They just make you feel good from the moment you put them on. And when you feel good, anything is possible.
I always say, to look good is to feel good.
And
that's all I got with my ancient references to Billy Crystal on Saturday Night Live circa 1984.
Oh, wait a minute. That was Fernando's Hideaway? You look marvelous.
MeUndies make you look marvelous. MeUndies are made with a material sustainably sourced from beechwood trees. Their naturally soft fiber makes a fabric that won't sag down or ride up. And trust me, once you put on a pair of MeUndies, you'll get it.
Oh, that's so true. Doesn't sag down, doesn't ride up. You get underpants that are sent right to your door. You don't have to go out and hunt for the perfect pair at the store. And you're not going to try on underwear, right? I mean, that would be weird and gross. And then, settle for something that's just good enough or cheap enough. No. This is the real deal.
And they do look good on you in those moments when, usually you're alone, when you're looking at yourself with the pants off. But if you happen to glance in the mirror and you're wearing MeUndies.
If you're married, you're alone when that happens.
But in all honesty, there are times that I'll go to my health club and I will be, switching out of my street gear into my workout gear, and I'll realize, oh boy, I am being seen in public right now with underpants that I've had since 1993. That's a weird thing guys do. We have a hard time throwing away old underpants. But if you get MeUndies, you're going to notice the difference right away. I went to the club, I was changing, I had my MeUndies on, and I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to go walk around the locker room for a little while. I was kind of showing off a little bit. And so that was the sort of, and it gives you confidence, too, knowing that what you're wearing underneath your clothes is as good as what you're wearing on the outside. And MeUndies is so sure you'll love your first pair that if you're not happy, they'll do whatever they can to get you into the right pair of undies. And if they can't, keep them and they'll refund you. So it's really risk-free to try the best underwear ever.
And if you're still not sure, MeUndies has a deal for Rebel Force Radio listeners. First-time purchasers will get 15% off their first pair of MeUndies and free shipping. That's 15% off plus free shipping and a guarantee that you and your MeUndies will be very happy together.
So get your butt over to MeUndies.com/RFR and treat yourself right now to get your 15% off your first pair, free shipping, and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Go to MeUndies.com/RFR. That's MeUndies.com/RFR.
You wouldn't believe this, John, but I was just, I pulled up Facebook, and I swear to you, the very first thing that I see is, I'm sorry, this is on Twitter, excuse me, is Steven Stanton, who's an old friend here of the show. He posted this. Give this a listen.
The mercenary, Solo, begins as a mercenary and ends up as a hero.
He was a very practical guy, a materialist in his character, at least as he thought of himself. But he was a compassionate human being at the same time and didn't know it. The adventure evoked a quality of his character that he hadn't known he possessed.
I love you.
You know.
He thinks he's an egoist. He really isn't. And that's a very lovable kind of human being, I think, and there are lots of them functioning beautifully in the world. They think they're working for themselves, very practical and all, but no, there's something else pushing them.
And that is from The Power of Myth.
Yes, Joseph Campbell and The Power of Myth. That was Bill Moyer's PBS special that he did with Joseph Campbell back in... it was actually released about a year after Campbell had passed away. It was released in 1988. And it goes down as one of the most popular series in the history of public television. Bill Moyer's... Joseph Campbell and The Power of Myth.
It is now available on Netflix. So if you're a Netflix subscriber, you can check that out.
That's right.
Yeah.
The book's great. The video's great. And 9/10 of that quote, I dropped at the beginning of this podcast.
Yes.
So we just beat it.
Yeah, that's right.
We just beat it. But you know what? I believe the people who put this movie, Solo, together paid heed to those words and carefully continued that very tradition in this movie. And it's beautiful. And he is kind of serving himself to get freedom, but by getting freedom, he can help other people get freedom. So it's actually a virtue. It's not a selfish thing.
Do you think that Han Solo understands himself, or does he have a sort of a funhouse mirror image of himself? Because it seems as though, as Joseph Campbell says, that he sees himself as this egoist. He believes he's an egoist, but he's really not. And that makes for a very lovable character. Is that what makes Han Solo so appealing to us?
Yeah, I would say it's contextually sensitive. So, for instance, he might have a funhouse mirror image about what he is and what's going on, but there's a point when he sees the world crystal clear. When he had to blast Greedo in A New Hope, and when he had to take out Beckett in Solo, there was no warping in his mirror at all.
Now, which version of A New Hope? You're referring to the original.
Han shot first.
Yeah, that's it. Let's make that the only one we ever refer to.
Right.
What say?
But he, I mean, if he is a smuggler and if he is a tough guy, and if he's when it comes to those moments, he is. I mean, he really is. And
that is a really jarring, it's a real jarring scene because you got Woody Harrelson's character there, who's about to monologue a bit and lecture Han about how he didn't get it right, and he blows him away right there. But then he immediately grabs him, and there's this sense of grief.
There is a compassionate moment.
Great.
Yes, very compassionate.
There's a statue in the Vatican that looks just like that moment, and it's beautiful. And remember I told you before that Han's a hyper-optimist? And that the problem with hyper-optimists is when the roof comes falling down, you can't say, oh, it's not going to hit my head. It's time to run, okay? And the problem with hyper-optimists is they don't have the agility to flick the switch and get to where they need to be. And pessimists, and that's where they get crushed in life. And Han does not seem to have that. In both the Greedo situation, he shot first, and in the in against Beckett, I expected both times I saw the movie, even though I knew what was happening the second time, I expected that moment to extend a few more beats until some moment happened where it was like bang bang and one guy shot the other. But Han didn't hesitate. night. He knew what the moment was. He was that guy, and he's an optimist who knows how to flick the switch when pessimism and its dark feelings call for it.
The statue you refer to in the Vatican is something sculpted by Michelangelo. It's called Pieta. I'm probably saying that incorrectly, but it does show what appears to be the Virgin Mary holding Jesus Christ.
And it's one of those considered most compassionate moments ever rendered in art.
And it is beautiful. And I'm looking at it right now. Michelangelo's Vatican Pieta, and it is definitely reminiscent of that final sequence where Han is cradling the dying Beckett.
It's also one of my favorite moments in sports when I see a competitor, they vie heavily, one person just crushes the other person, and then, I mean, it's just one of my favorite moments in sports. I don't even care what the score is.
You know, in boxing, we've seen so many big fights happen between two opponents who really appreciate and respect one another, and they beat the hell out of each other for 12 rounds, but at the end of the fight, they're hugging each other.
Or runners in the Olympics where one breaks their leg or something, the other one stops, throws them over their shoulder, and crosses the finish line together kind of stuff. You're making me verklempt here, Jimmy. I'm getting verklempt.
Yeah, ultimate sportsmanship. And so what does the, Han, killing Beckett, if we look at this hero's journey, what does that represent? Is that Han replacing Beckett in the universe as the new Beckett?
Well, just like Dryden Voss falls out and Kira is going to spend a lot more time with the Sith, in this universe where everybody is master and servant, everybody's a cog in the wheel, right? So once one gets knocked out, the others come along and suck them up. But what I think was the moment there with Beckett was a few things. One, as I just pointed out, it showed that when necessary, Han knows that there's pessimism to be had and then act upon it with great, almost athleticism, the speed with which he dispatches these bastards. Anyway, the bigger thing happens, though, is this. From the moment the movie starts, from the opening image, when he's trying to spark together that ride and get away. And on the second, I was shocked at how good the actor was at showing real, like, I'm about to die, I got to get out of here, in his face. I thought it was a wonderful moment. From that first moment of the movie, up until the moment he zaps Beckett, Han is not free. At every moment in the movie, he's serving somebody else, or if he has a fleeting moment of freedom, he doesn't have any power or money or fuel or ship or anything to do with it. So, for instance, at first he serves Lady Proxima, then he throws a rock through the glass and makes a run for it. Then he serves the Imperial Force because they impress him, and he's trying to get away from the bad guys. Then when he breaks away from the Imperial Force, he's begging Beckett, let me be on your team. So when he's under Beckett's thumb, then when he screws up the train robbery and lets the load go, according to Beckett, they both go and serve under Dryden. And then they're serving under Dryden until they get to the place where it's refined, when Enfys Nest shows up and has him covered with all the guns. So he's constantly in a universe where, from probably the day he was born, he hasn't had a free moment. And the minute he zaps Beckett, it's him, it's Chewie, and it's 60 million units. There's no more Dryden Voss. The yacht just flew away. He's free.
Right, and with the yacht flying away, I think that also represents another level of freedom to Han, because he had been fighting, essentially motivated for all of these years to reunite with his girl, Kira. But by removing herself from the situation, she also is able to give Han even more freedom.
Agreed. Great point.
Because he's now motivated for himself. He's not motivated to save her or rescue her or anything. She's already been liberated and is on her own journey at this point. And even if Han laments the fact that he's no longer with her, he knows that she is in control of her own destiny, which is more information than he had during those years when he was fighting for the Imperial forces, thinking, my girl has been left behind on Corellia, and she's probably being abused, misused, and held in captivity. Now at least he knows she is on her own path, and she has her own, she's been liberated.
And he's free of having to go back and rescue her, too.
Right.
Which was nagging, if you will. Sorry to use the word nagging when it comes to a love interest. But, going back to the mythology of the teenager, the young man falling in love with a girl, sometimes breaking up is not easy to do. There's a lot of songs from the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and right now about that. And
I know one off the top of my head. Breaking up is hard to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so she did it for him. And that's freeing. Because sometimes, look, if she's right and he's the good guy, then the good guy sucks at breaking up with the girlfriend. So she took off and freed him of that. But his freedom is kind of fleeting. Like in that universe, what is the freedom he has? He doesn't really have freedom until he gets the Falcon. Now, at the very end of the movie. And then literally the last scene, the last seconds. I don't even know if it's minutes. The last seconds. Han is truly free.
He's finally, yes.
With the love of his life and a big, hairy, fun dude.
But... not to rain on this parade, but who is he on his way to go see?
Right. Fool.
The next one that's going to put him in enslavement.
Well, that's if the deal goes wrong.
All right. Well, right. And of course, we know it does.
Right. He's not a very good smuggler, then, is he?
Because he's not a very good bad guy.
I mean, let's look. Let's break it down like a baseball mathematician would, at bats and stuff. He gets the chance to smuggle or grab the train and he's flying the ship, and that goes wrong. He's got to ditch that. I know he does something wrong later that pisses John.
Well, even before that, John, he ticks off Lady Proxima.
Yes.
He's supposed to bring something back to them.
Okay, that's a bad
It's almost
deal.
got this Oliver Twist thing going on where she's sort of like the Fagin character, and he's got to go out and steal and bring the booty back to her.
Perfectly said, because when he returns, before he explains it to her, check out the scene where the little Fagin kids are there, and one of the kids says, "Oh, look at what I stole. I'll get a second unit for this."
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Please, sir, I may have another,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
they weren't being too discreet about that. But, okay, so he blows it for Proxima. He blows the train robbery. He does pull off in 12 parsecs when you round it down. He does pull off the unrefined haul, but then he kind of blows it at the end, but then he kind of gets it at the end, but then he gives it away at the end. So it's not like he's going to cash it away. And then he goes and works for Jabba, and he blows it. So, from the facts we know, and we don't know everything, but from the facts we know, he is not heading to Cooperstown.
No, they're not. He will not have a plaque in the Hall of Fame of smugglers. No question about it.
Oh.
Yeah. Wow. John, this has been incredibly insightful, and what an amazing breakdown of a character that I think a lot of us felt we knew backwards and forwards. And even after seeing this film, I think a lot of us felt that it just sort of confirmed many things that we believed about this character for so many years. But you really did provide incredible insight. And Luke Skywalker may be a hero, and he may be a big hero in the Star Wars mythos, but he's not the only hero. Han Solo has quite his own hero's journey, which I really appreciate you sharing with us this week. This has just been a lot of fun.
Oh, it's my pleasure, because I get to absorb all the positive and optimistic things that Han's radiating, and I got to send it through my mythological filters, and I got to share the positivity with you, and I hope the whole thing was uplifting. That was my main hope here.
It was fantastic. What do you think, Chewie? Yeah. There you go. So thumbs up from the Wook. And and I am relieved you didn't analyze the film and discover that the real romance was between Han and Chewie. I don't know. Those long nights in hyperspace, you know.
They did shower together in this movie.
That's right. That's true.
Well, thanks a lot for coming by, John.
Hey, thanks, gentlemen. I can't wait for the next movie to come out. Please invite me back. I'm there in a minute.
Well, you know, why wait till the next movie? We have so many other Star Wars films we haven't gotten your mythological take on.
I'm in.
So maybe we can look back at the original trilogy or the prequel trilogy and hear your mythological blueprints for guys like Anakin Skywalker or
I've got one for John.
Who's this?
I've got one that I would like John to maybe put some thought into. And that is Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is a character that is going to most likely feature in his own story, maybe several stories, we don't know. But this guy has a bit of a checkered past, and there's two big things that stick out to me as massive blunders of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And it's not this thing that he laments about, I thought I could train him just as well as Yoda. I was wrong. I don't feel that Obi-Wan made any massive mistakes in the training of Anakin. And I don't want to fill your head with, my own thoughts, but the two big things that he does that I think are questionable is, one, he cannot bring it upon himself to really finish the job on Mustafar. And think of how different the galaxy might have been had he done that. And number two, certain point of view or no, one could argue that he really is manipulating Luke through A New Hope and even into Empire Strikes Back. So that's it. I think that's, those two things make me very, very interested in that character. I'm a big Obi-Wan Kenobi fan. I really am. So I'm not trying to come down on the character. But for a hero, those two things really I'm fascinated by.
I like both of those. My initial reaction to the first point, why didn't he finish this off? Same thing happened in The Lord of the Rings. He could have thrown the ring in. Could have thrown it into the fire. We wouldn't have had to do all this, right? Yep. So I'm going to chase that down for you. And then the second point you talked about, which was he was manipulating him, that's a beautiful mythological point about the mystagogue, the old man, the wise old creature out of the forest. Somebody comes out and not only shares some essential instruction for the hero to move forward, but usually also provides an amulet or a power source or something to protect them along the way, like a chain of armor or a lightsaber, for instance. So they're supposed to be manipulative, but only in the best way, the way elementary and high school teachers are supposed to manipulate her into becoming a better person and a good functioning member of society. But I'm sensing from what you said was that you feel that Obi-Wan was probably pushing a little too far and over-manipulating.
Potentially. I think he did it for the greater good. But I have had friends and fellow fans argue the point a little bit of why is this guy such a hero? He lied to Luke. He wasn't able to get the job done when it really mattered with Anakin.
Well, he had some of the best lines in history because they basically fed him the lines of a Zen master. So, I mean, everything wins. I mean, only Yoda had cooler lines, really, like that.
Yeah. But anyway, so you're welcome back here anytime.
Jason, thank you. Jimmy, thank you.
Oh, you're fantastic. You are a treasure, man. You are a treasure. And I encourage everyone to check it out. The unauthorized illustrated biography of Bruce Lee, Poised to Pummel. Check that out. We're excited to be one of the first to know when the Bob Marley book is going to be out. And are you active online, social media, anywhere where if folks want to hear what you have to say? Because you really should be out there in terms of maybe blogging or something.
I'm more like Obi-Wan at the beginning of A New Hope, man. You got to find me in the cave.
Well, you know what? I'm happy to be part of the team that's bringing you to the masses because you know what? You're so centered, and I think that social media would just throw you for a loop. So let's keep you shielded from that. We're going to keep you our little secret.
Let's keep it fresh, boys.
Yes. Yeah. John Marcoux, thank you so much for joining us here on Rebel Force Radio with your amazing and mind-blowing mythological blueprint for Han Solo as seen in Solo, A Star Wars Story.
I got a really good feeling about this. Get full access to RFR only on Patreon. Become a member of the RFR Patreon community to get more Rebel Force Radio. Bonus shows and content are available right now only at patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio. Exclusive programming like RFR Rush Hour. Join Jimmy and Jason on the ride home. RFR Rewind. Look back at some of the show's greatest moments. RFR Q&A, featuring you as the show host, moderating the conversation for at least a full half hour. Plus, get full stereo high-fidelity episodes of the latest RFR, early access to RFR events, ringtones, exclusive updates, giveaways, and more. Become a member of the RFR Patreon community to get it all, and your contributions will help keep RFR alive for years to come. It all happens at patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio. Don't wait. Visit Patreon today to get all access to RFR. Patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio.
I have good news for you, my lord.
That's good news. Come closer, I have good news.
Whoa! Yeah, we've got news. I don't know if you'd call it good. I'd call it conflicting. But it all started with a piece over on Collider. Exclusive. That means only they have this. Future A Star Wars Story spinoffs on hold at Lucasfilm. It may be a while before we see any more movies like Solo, A Star Wars Story out of Lucasfilm. Sources with knowledge of the situation. I love that. That's a great source. Sources with knowledge of the situation tell Collider that Lucasfilm has decided to put plans for more A Star Wars Story spinoff movies on hold, instead opting to focus their attention on Episode 9 and what the next trilogy of Star Wars films will be after that. Sources tell us that the previously rumored Obi-Wan movie, which was in active development, but those who were working on the film are no longer involved. It was recently reported that Logan filmmaker James Mangold, who was in early talks to write and direct the Boba Fett film, but that was before Solo's release. All right, so again, according to Collider, they're claiming it is an exclusive that the spin-off films, A Star Wars Story, are no longer in active development. Jim, what do you think? Does this line up with where you think things are right now?
Oh, absolutely I do. Absolutely I do. I think that a serious reset is in order for Lucasfilm. I think that they have decided to concentrate on Episode 9 because I think that's where there's a lot of pressure on that movie. And so all resources are going to be directed toward that film. And you have here about a year and a half to make sure all the proper pieces are in place. There's going to be additional distractions. The live-action TV series is still greenlit. There's going to be, of course, the Resistance animated show, but I mean, that really shouldn't affect how a major movie studio works. But when it comes to things like marketing and PR, it most certainly does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for sure. Now, there is more detail over at Star Wars Newsnet, and they've got a few more they've got the Collider quote, and then they've got a few more details, and these are very interesting. So check these out. Now, they don't name a source. They just say that this is additional information that they have heard. In light of the director change and having to nearly reshoot the entire movie, Lucasfilm wanted to move Solo, A Star Wars Story to December 2018. Now, we've heard this before, right?
Yeah.
Episode 7 was moved from a May release to a December release. J.J. Abrams lobbied for that. I believe Rogue One was also moved. I know 2 of the movies so far had release dates that had been switched.
Yes. Well, obviously, just to go back in time and talk about things like release dates getting shuffled around and what have you. Yeah, you have to go back to Episode 7, which was originally scheduled to be released in summer 2015. This was confirmed at D23 by, I believe, Alan Horn. Actually said the summertime release for Episode 7, but that got pushed back. J.J. Abrams, from what we understood, demanded more time. He needed more time to work out things because obviously he got thrown into He got thrown for a loop when the decision was made to completely revamp the script that was prepared by Michael Arndt under the guidance of George Lucas. Well, they threw that script out. So that pushed things back because now J.J. Abrams, in addition to finding himself prepping to direct a Star Wars film, he's also now the screenwriter. So they bring Lawrence Kasdan over from the Solo movie. He was actually working on the Solo movie all the way back then. And they put that on the shelf, brought Lawrence in, and he and JJ banged out that script, and they kept it to that December release. And with the success of the December release, that seemed like a good place to start parking Star Wars films. So moving forward, you get to Rogue One, and that is scheduled for the December the next year. That has to be reshot and restructured about the final third of the film, absolutely completely restructured. And so that cost more. That raised the budget up. So now you have two situations happening here where the run-up time to the first film was extended by 6 months, obviously costing more money. And then the follow-up film the next year, that had delays and reshoots and all kind of business going on, which obviously blew the budget way out of hand. Meanwhile, the Josh Trank debacle happens as he's developing what was rumored to be the Boba Fett film. So that whole project blows up. And Lawrence Kasdan just finishes writing The Force Awakens. The film gets released. He's exhausted from the process, and they say, hey, you got to do the Solo film again because the Boba Fett thing blew up. He's like, you're doing the Solo thing again? So he's shocked. And so they...
And then he just shoves it off to his son.
Well, yeah, that's how John Kasdan got brought in.
Right.
And so they work together on that because Larry's exhausted. And so that's back on. So things keep getting shuffled around now. Meanwhile, things are going on behind the scenes to launch a live-action show in an amusement park. But, of course, that kind of stuff, for the most part, it is all under the Lucasfilm umbrella. Even the amusement park stuff, because the concepts and the creative energy behind it, a lot of that, I think, is coming from Lucasfilm in conjunction with Disney Imagineering. So a lot of stuff is happening, right? And so I think resources are starting to get really stretched thin here now. By the time the Solo film is in front of cameras and blows up because the directing team is found to be incompatible with the studio, and so they throw away the whole film, how it got that far in the process before something was done, I mean, it's hard to know because everything is behind. It's all it's all just left to us to piece together from the information that gets leaked or from interviews that we listen to, etc. But of course, that blows up. So they have to reshoot the whole film, and that blows up that budget. So now you've had 1, 2, 3, 4 films that have all gone over budget. And when I say the 4 films, I'm including The Force Awakens in there. Even though that thing was a big, monstrous box office draw, it still ended up costing the studio more to produce it than they obviously had out on the table at first because it was extended by 6 months. So all those people, all those resources, all that technology, you have to pay for all that stuff. And so... luckily, The Force Awakens made huge box office. Luckily, Rogue One made huge box office. And luckily, The Last Jedi made huge box office. The Last Jedi, obviously, being the only one that really seemed to carry on very smoothly throughout the pre-production shooting schedule. But then the release happened. And sure, the box office was great, but it is going down in history as the most divisive film in Star Wars history. And as a result then, and a number of factors involved, when Solo finally gets released, then the box office is flat, and so now the fingers are all being pointed. And they look at that Solo film is not being a one-film loss, but a two-film loss because it had to be shot twice. So everything's over budget.
Good point. And the budget numbers that we've seen that have been released have all been around the Lord Miller time period. They have not really given us even estimates, although, a lot of different folks have kind of run their own estimates as what they think the Ron Howard reshoots cost. Plus you got the cost of Ron Howard himself, all of that. So, the hit on Solo could be anywhere between $80 and $150 million loss. And that's not good. But here's what's interesting. So even though, they had made these adjustments in the release schedule before, apparently Disney put their foot down with Solo. And they said it's not gonna happen. So they granted them the budget to make the changes that they needed, but they had to make the May 25th release date. And in addition to that, they weren't going to let Solo interfere with any plans for Avengers Infinity War. Mm-hmm. So Solo was not going to get any preferential treatment in marketing to make up for lost time due to its reshoots that lasted all the way into the fall of 2017.
Now, why do you think that is? Because the previous three films released under the Disney umbrella were very successful films, and the marketing for them was all really solid. Especially The Force Awakens, but considering you have that extra time. And also with The Force Awakens, I'm telling you, this is how they think in the boardroom when they're breaking it all down. And they say, wow, The Force Awakens, it made like $2 billion, worldwide or something. Unbelievable numbers. But it cost us so much extra because it was under production for an extra 6 months. And so they go, well, if it didn't just go that extra 6 months, we could have made this much more money on it. And that's how they look at things. So they're always, and that's Hollywood, and they always are looking for a scapegoat or what have you. I'm not looking for a scapegoat here, but I am, thinking to myself, this is an opportune moment for the brakes to be applied, just maybe ever so slightly, and pull back and reevaluate where this thing is going.
Well, this article here, it does point out, which is, Disney is in a place now where it does control so many of the large properties that are bankable at the box office, from the Pixar films to the Marvel Universe, now Star Wars. And it's a juggling act. I mean, it used to be that they had to worry about what other studios are doing. Now they have to worry more about what they're doing. But, it's funny because you mentioned, George, by the way, I forgot that was the first person essentially that they fired. But if you look at the body count associated with these movies, who have we lost, or who has lost credibility along the way? George Lucas, Michael Arndt, Josh Trank, Gareth Edwards, Phil Lord, Chris Miller, and then Colin Trevorrow. Colin Trevorrow, by the way, who's about to have a big week this week because the release of Jurassic Park 2, early buzz is that it's fantastic. And he was recently quoted as saying that the culture at Lucasfilm during his time of working on Episode 9 was acidic. Some might even say toxic, which is a very common word. Now, the people that have survived this, J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson, and Lawrence Kasdan. I'm not even going to say John Kasdan because to me the two of them are exactly the same. So I'm not going to give him credit for two bodies because But if you look at this, I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 versus 3. These aren't just firings, man. I mean, these are people with solid reputations. As we talk about the future of Lucasfilm and what's going on in this major reshuffling, I have to believe that Disney finally kind of woke up. I'm going to say, and I know there's all kinds of rumors. I think Kathleen Kennedy is out of there. I think she's gone. I think that the story group is going to be neutered. I think that and there's another story that just broke about how Lucasfilm isn't going to be banking on these kind of auteur directors anymore. They don't want these young flavor of the month directors. They're going after people that are skilled, that are competent, that are very, very familiar with how to run a blockbuster operation. So you just can't toss guys like Miller and Lord, Colin Trevorrow, who I think is going to be I think, again, he's going to have a great week. His name's going to be on top. People are going to be like, geez, why couldn't we have a guy like that making a Star Wars movie? Gareth Edwards, who played the good soldier, but everybody knows the film was yanked out of his hands after he basically gave them the movie that they said that they wanted. Then it turned out to not be what they actually wanted. You got Trank, and I hear he's got his own problems, but they yanked him out of there pretty fast. Michael Arndt, who's bankable. Toy Story, what are you going to do? And George Lucas, the creator of all of it. And when you stack all that up, it doesn't look good, because not only are you firing these people, but you're also, I think, soiling their reputations.
Well, it's Hollywood, and Hollywood could be the cruelest place, and then sometimes it can be kind of a forgiving place, because it seems like the same people always get hired over and over.
Yeah, it is what have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
So, the people forget very, very quick when there's money on the line. But getting back to this article here, they do say that Lucasfilm is returning focus to one project at a time per medium. So in development, of course, Episode 9 on the live-action film front, Star Wars Resistance, still being headed up by Dave Filoni, the animation team, and Jon Favreau's live-action TV series. Now, we're getting some conflicting reports, because we're also hearing that the Rian Johnson's trilogy, as well as the trilogy from the Game of Thrones guys, those are still in development.
Yes.
It was these standalone central hero or singular hero or character films that are the ones that are being tossed to the wayside, which is, what's funny. If you were to go to Vegas and put odds on all these different projects and say which one you think was going to make the most money, a completely uncharted, unknown time and place in the Star Wars universe, 3 films, talk about doubling down, tripling down, by Rian Johnson, the writer and director of the most divisive Star Wars film in history, versus the Obi-Wan Kenobi marooned on Tatooine story. Which one do you think is going to make more money?
Ewan McGregor.
Starring Ewan McGregor, right? Who, by the way, is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Not just for the prequel generation, but we don't have Alec Guinness anymore. Sorry, he is Obi-Wan Kenobi. So you still got him. He's still around. He's still game. He wants to do this. So, I understand Lucasfilm wants to focus. I would have 86'd Rian Johnson's trilogy. I'd have put this other trilogy with these Game of Thrones guys on ice. I'd have kept that Obi-Wan, because no one, universally, to a person, everyone is excited about that Obi-Wan movie. Mm-hmm. Both sides of the coin.
Hey, you know what? Before we dive any further into this, we do have to, remind ourselves that no one from Lucasfilm ever announced these films, the Boba Fett
is a good point.
Or the Obi-Wan. So it's, this is a report about something being shelved or put on hold for now that we're not even really supposed to know about.
Right. That was never officially announced. That is a great point.
However,
yeah,
with the names attached and the reputation of the sources providing that news, sources like The Hollywood Reporter, sources like Collider, which I think is a reputable source, I think that these were leaks done purposefully to gauge fan reaction to the ideas. Odd that the Game of Thrones guys trilogy and the Rian Johnson trilogies were officially announced. I think their plan is, their strategy is to roll out the Game of Thrones guys, their series of films. I shouldn't say trilogy. Their series of films.
Series, right.
That's how the wording was in the press release. Series of films. So that's at least 2 movies. But I think those are movies that would appeal to a more mature audience. And the Rian Johnson trilogy is being crafted to appeal to a more youthful audience. I think they're trying to play it that way. I think they're trying to play on demographics and, maybe create something that's edgier. I don't even know R-rated Star Wars, maybe, but I don't see Disney doing R-rated Star Wars.
I don't think so either. I think that Disney believed that Lucasfilm was just going to proceed in a sort of orderly fashion, the same as the Marvel Cinematic Universe has. The big difference being is that Marvel is a bunch of little franchises. And I'm not belittling it. What I'm saying is it's a collection of different characters that have their own backstories and their own kind of separate lives away from each other. Every once in a while they get together, they team up, blah, blah, blah. But Star Wars has always been one singular story. Star Wars has always been one canon. And Star Wars fans, myself included, we take canon very seriously. And so this idea that you can just bounce around timelines, everything, it's going to create confusion amongst casual movie goers. I think they've got to be real careful about how they present it. For us, those of us doing a podcast like this or listening to a podcast like this, of course, we know when Solo takes place. We know when Rogue One took place. We know when Last Jedi took place. But as we've covered here on the show before, it can be really confusing for a general audience. Even people who consider themselves fans, people who like Star Wars, they go to the movie. They're like, now, when does this one take place? Mm-hmm. What am I seeing? Wait, is that Han Solo? He just died. Where's Rey? And that's probably seems laughable to some people, but you got to think like someone who is not so steeped into this stuff. Now, that was Collider. That was the folks over at StarWarsNewsNet.com. Just today, an article by our buddy at ABC News, Clayton Sandell, he says multiple films still in Star Wars pipeline. So he has sources, of course, at Lucasfilm. Now, in full disclosure here, Clayton's writing for ABC. ABC is a subsidiary of Disney. Disney owns Lucasfilm, so you do the math. But Lucasfilm sources on Thursday characterized as, quote, inaccurate, a report, obviously the Collider report, that future Star Wars movies falling outside of the regular trilogy storyline, episode 1 to 9, have been put on hold in the wake of the box office underperformance of Solo, a Star Wars story. Now, that's not exactly what the Collider story was saying. The Collider story was saying that those individual character study films like Solo, like Obi-Wan, like Boba Fett, those are now no longer off the table. In this article, he's very specifically saying future Star Wars movies falling outside of the regular trilogy storyline, episodes 1 to 9, have been put on hold. That is an inaccurate report, when Collider does admit that the Rian Johnson trilogy, as well as the Game of Thrones guys series of films, as you point out, Jim, are still in development. And those are technically outside of episodes 1 to 9 here. So they're not actually denying what's being said. They might be denying the headline, but they're not denying the guts of the story.
I hear you. And so does Collider writer Stephen Frosty Weintraub, who wrote the initial report. He tweeted out just earlier this evening, "My report is accurate, double-sourced. ABC is owned by Disney. Perhaps trust the independent site that has a pretty good track record." So what he's saying there is he recognizes ABC's report, and I don't mean to disparage Clayton at all. He's a great guy and a awesome, amazing journalist, and he has the utmost credibility. But he just might be caught in the middle of something here where one Disney branch is trying to spin something for another Disney branch. And that's what kind of scares me when I think about now Disney is going to be getting 20th Century Fox. It looks like it. They have there's been competition with the bids, but it looks like Disney is going to come out on top of that one. It's like, how much can one company control, especially when it comes to things like entertainment platforms and media platforms?
Yeah.
When they work together, when one is using the other to be a spokesperson, then I think it gets to be a little confusing. And
well, it sure is. I mean, it sure is. I mean, because right now, despite our affection for Clayton, we're kind of skeptical. Say, well, it's it's not unusual that parent company's subsidiary would be backing up. It is a little odd, right? It's odd, and it may be completely innocent, and this may be extraordinarily accurate, but at the same time, because of the inbred nature of all of this, it does raise eyebrows, perhaps where eyebrows shouldn't be raised, or perhaps where they should be. I don't know.
It seems like spin control. If you want the honest to goodness truth, I put more faith and credibility in the report that came from Steve Weintraub at Collider.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm kind of with you. Now, if you look at Disney stock, it doesn't look good. Going back here, it's a little bit up and down. It's been in a downward trend for the last 5 days. And, so some of these things, I mean, look, if you're a Disney shareholder and you're hearing that this slate of movies that you were promised was going to, bring the company hundreds of millions of dollars are now on ice. You've got chaos happening at Lucasfilm, which, I don't know how else you would describe it. I mean, we can be good soldiers, but at the same time, the fact of the matter is, as much as I love Star Wars, you look at the body count, you look at the antagonistic attitude that is being taken by employees of Lucasfilm, and this kind of us versus them thing that's going on. And as you'll find out, later, we've got an email that we're going to share that kind of puts it all in perspective, at least from a corporate Disney point of view. It's just there's no other words really to describe it. It is not good. It's not a good scene. And I think that it's, at the end of the day, I think it's kind of like, a big storm that comes in at springtime and just cleans everything off. And even though the storm is kind of ugly and scary and violent at times, at the end, I think you're dealing with something better than it was when it started. And I do believe that. I do believe that this is growing pains. I think Disney is trying very, very hard. But I think that they left the kid alone at home, and he was too young.
Well, I think it was just a case of too much too fast. And
but why? Why do you think that was, Jim? Why do you think?
Because they looked at what Marvel was doing and thought that Star Wars can, it's a square peg trying to fit it into a round hole. Yeah. Star Wars depended on the strength of the mythology, depended on that incubation period between the films.
Yes, giving fans time to digest and assimilate, and I mean, as silly as it sounds, even just collecting all of the toys and the merch and reading the behind the scenes stuff. I mean, in the past, we had years to just digest it all. And now it's coming at you so fast, you can't help but feel that, it's rushed. Mm-hmm. It's rushed. And if you look at I think a lot of the problems with The Last Jedi were that they simply didn't have time to really understand what was happening with The Force Awakens in order to create, a satisfying sequel to that. I mean, people say, oh, well, it seems like, Rian Johnson wrote this thing having never seen Force Awakens. Well, guess what? He hadn't. No one had. He was writing this thing at the time that Force Awakens was still in production.
All right, so let me ask you a question. If things are being put on hold, what's the finish line here? I mean, if Episode 9 is a huge success, fans love it, the box office public loves it, it makes a ton of money, Disney loves it, everyone loves it. It brings fandom back together. Mm-hmm. Then do you think they say, all right, go, and greenlight everything that's been put on hold? Or
no.
Yeah, they're going to start, hopefully start showing a little more discretion and not fart out stuff that's important parts of this mythology. I think that's very important. And again, give us that time to let the mythology grow. The 3-year span between the saga films are definitely something that is an important part of that mix. You can have maybe one film you drop in right in the middle of that 3-year span. I think that would work much better. It really would.
I've got an analogy that I want to throw out there, and just bear with me on this. When you see a really, really great play, oftentimes it's the silences in between the lines of dialogue that say more than the actual dialogue does. And it's a hard thing to explain, but when the acting is so fantastic, whether it be the body language or what have you, or the pregnant pauses, when it's acted and performed so well, or even in a piece of music where it swells, it crescendos, and then it gets quieter. I think that, Jim, when you talk about that, a 2 or 3 year gap in between these, I think that those are just as important as what we're seeing on the screen, especially for fandom. The time to, as I say, digest, understand, make sense of, and add it to the existing mythology. I don't know what the right answer is, whether it be a year, 2 years, 3 years. I don't think there's necessarily a magic number. But having that time, and so time for the fans as well as time for the creative teams that are putting these things together. I think it was also just a dreadful, terrible mistake to think that they could do this trilogy of films without a singular vision behind it. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And you can say, well, George Lucas did it. George Lucas wrote that letter to J.J. Abrams and the folks behind Lost and said, well, my hat's off to you. Here's a dirty little secret. I too was making it up as I went along. But it was out of one singular guy's mind. So it's okay if it's out of one person's brain that you're making it up as you go along. But instead of playing the silly game of, I'm going to start out a story and then I'm going to say, tag, you're it, and not give you anything else, and wonder why there's not cohesion and wonder why it creates division.
Well, you know what? I'm okay with that. Hey, let's just throw it up against the wall and see if it sticks. I think there's something to be said for that. But I agree that with a property like this and with the wide breadth of the mythology, it did require a little bit more stewardship. And so that's why I think that after Episode 9 is released, there still won't be any announcements about other plans to do any films or anything like that. All resources will go toward Episode 9. In 2020, Bob Iger will most likely announce who his successor is going to be. And then at that point, that person is going to start segueing in as Iger works out through the end of his contract, which he has a contract signed through December 2021. The reason now, and Iger has made attempts to start his the progression of his stepping down, but he keeps getting his contract extended because of deals like the looming 20th Century Fox deal. So they want, the board of directors want to keep the consistency and the stability there in the big office. And so Bob is going to stick around until December 2021, which leads me to believe that in 2020, the decision about his successor will be made and announced. And the two of them will work together throughout the course of the final year of Bob's contract. And, that's all just mere guesswork, but this is a big company. I don't see Bob's, saying, on December 2021, here's the new guy. See ya, I'm out. I think it's a very complex process.
No, if you know what, if I had to guess, what the conversation might have been like, Bob Iger calls up Kathleen Kennedy and says, "There's a problem, fix it." I kid you not. That's how it works. There's a problem, you fix it, or you're gone. Because if I'm Bob Iger and I'm seeing these headlines about, Star Wars, being ripped down the middle and all of this contention, and I've got a $150 million loss, and, essentially I agreed to bankroll 2 movies, or the cost of 2 movies for 1 movie, I'm not going to be very happy. This does not look well in this sort of wishy-washy, hire them and fire them. And now think about all the people that were associated most likely with the Kenobi film, with this Boba Fett film. Now these people, they're gone, right? I mean, I'm not crying buckets for them. They're going to go on to other things. These are, I'm sure, very talented people. So you add them to the body count. This is not good. It's a big town, but it's a small town. And you do not want people to go like Colin Trevorrow saying, you know what, it was a completely acidic environment. And, you're going to have people say, ain't no way. I love Star Wars, but I'm not taking that gig. I'm not going to be the next Colin Trevorrow. I'm not going to be the next Phil Lord or Chris Miller. They don't want that. And Bob Iger and Alan Horn, they don't want that out there in the business, in the industry, saying that this is some sort of bad luck charm or kiss of death when you sign on to do something that should be, the highlight of your life, of your career, working on a Star Wars movie. It should be a blessing. One other thing, speaking of breaking news, our friends over at Fantatrax, they hit on this over the weekend. Dateline June 18th. Fantatrax is saying, look, after 8 months and 3,000 posts, you're familiar enough with Fantatrax to know that our main stock in trade is daily news and lots of it. So with that in mind, we're about to drop another juicy piece of news on you. Many will consider this a spoiler. So, in all fairness...
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
Here you go. With the current mood of fandom and the bad smell that's permeating through Star Wars right now, it's time for some good, healthy, positive news, and that is that Billy D. Williams is back on board as Lando Calrissian for Episode 9. We were asked by our original source to verify this with another independent source before they ran with it. They did that, and they confirmed this is indeed correct. And before anyone asks, we're not going to name our sources because that's not how it works. Filming on Episode 9 starts next month, so expect to see an official confirmation of this exciting news very soon.
Of course, this makes
Billy D.
Yes, Billy D. Williams returning to Star Wars. I feel like the filmmakers' hands were a little forced to bring Billy D. back because there has been resistance to the BDW in the first 2 films. You could have easily slotted him into The Last Jedi and had him been the contact that Poe and Finn reach out to track down the Master Codebreaker. That could have been Billy D. As a matter of fact, Billy D. could have been the Master Codebreaker. I mean, Lando Calrissian, why not? But there was an obvious reluctancy to bring him back because the way the dominoes were falling was Episode 7 was to be Harrison Ford, Han Solo's sign-off. Episode 8 to be Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill's sign-off. Last person standing, Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia. Episode 9 was supposed to be her film. But of course, the tragedy of Carrie Fisher's death ruined all of those plans. So what other legacy character can you tap into to bring in to fill the void of no legacy characters in Episode 9? Well, it doesn't take a mathematician or a NASA scientist to realize Billy D. Williams, Lando Calrissian, let's get him back. Obviously, not the direction or the way the dominoes are supposed to fall. But you got to do what you can do to fill that void.
Right. They're running out of legacy characters to kill off, so they got to get Lando in there.
I mean, who's next?
So they
Wedge?
can promptly dispatch him. Well, hey, don't count him out. Don't count him out. Remember, the past must die. Kill it. Blow it up.
Well, too much.
Stab
too
it in
fast.
the chest with in the heart and throw it off a bridge and then blow up the planet. Yeah. I mean, if you really need, So that's the cynic in me. But I'm with you. I think that they're going to the BDW well, the Lando well, because they really didn't have a choice. They're left without these legacy characters. You might be saying, well, what about 3PO, R2, Chewbacca? I think they're around. I mean, we saw various marketing pieces and merchandise out there that features the future of Star Wars. And the future of Star Wars is Rey and Finn and Poe, Chewie, BB-8, and sometimes 3PO and R2. Depends on what lunchbox you're looking at, but they're in there occasionally.
Wait, General Reichian isn't on the list?
No.
Nine Numb. Now, Nine Numb they keep bringing back, like he's going to be doing something in these films. He hasn't done anything in any of these films. And also,
he's definitely there. He's definitely there to give that original trilogy creature vibe.
Thank God.
I still think they need to step that up. They got to step that up.
I have to admit, as much as I love seeing Nine Numb in the sequel films, Nine Numb with eyelids kind of weirds me out a little bit. His face is too expressive. I need just like the flat-looking Nine Numb face. I can't recall if were his eyelids articulate in the original trilogy. They must have been a little bit, right?
You know what? I think they were.
Yeah, I do too.
But it's hard to say because the Ewoks weren't
true
until they did the Blu-ray.
Right. And I don't mind that at all. I really don't. I mean, they blink. It's fast. It gives more life to those relatively lifeless masks. But with Nine Numb, there was almost he was almost more like wide-eyed, and then every time I see him in the sequel trilogy, he's got like squinty eyes, like he was hanging out with Bob Marley behind the trailer or something. But he's kind of got that look, and so I don't know. I kind of like the expression on his face as a puppet in Return of the Jedi. But I'm still very happy to see him in the sequel films because, like you said, Jason, it's something that ties us into those alien cultures from the original trilogy or the prequel trilogy, where there was tons of crossover. Obviously, Lucas put everything into the stew when it came to the prequel trilogy. In The Phantom Menace, you saw not only new and amazing characters, but you would see the familiar, like the Greedos and the Hammerheads and the Bith. And even then from films like Jedi, he would have those Klaatu's and all those crazy characters. Even like an Ishi Tib. How about an Ishi Tib for the sequel trilogy? Just one.
Do we have?
Just one.
Do we have an Ishi Tib?
Just one.
Ishi Tib.
Starfish Wars. But come on.
Yes.
How about an Ishi Tib? Why not?
All right. Before we wrap things up here, I do want to talk about a couple of things here with respect to the Kelly Marie Tran story about Kelly Marie not leaving Instagram. She did delete her post, but the account is still there. And a couple of ladies who are no strangers to what Kelly apparently has undergone, the trolling, the harassment, all of that, have spoken out. And I want to share one here. This is a story that was on Mashable, but the interview originally took place in the Hollywood Reporter, and that is Leslie Jones, who starred in the Ghostbusters remake back in 2016, Ghostbusters 2016, the all-female reboot. She's also on Saturday Night Live. And she really became the face of online harassment. And people were vicious to her. And, as if, the whole idea of this Ghostbusters film, whether you like it or not, was her idea. She's a hired gun. She's an actress, comedian, and she was cast in this film, and people were just brutal to her. But this is the advice that she gave to Kelly Marie Tran, which I thought was very interesting. Because the Hollywood Reporter just came out and asked her, do you have any advice for Star Wars Last Jedi, Kelly Marie Tran, who is facing the same kind of harassment as you? She says, definitely do not take that blank personal. I would tell her definitely not to take this blank personal. It don't have nothing to do with her, and I wouldn't have turned off my damn account. So she says, what I would do is I would screenshot every one of those offensive attacks, because when you do, they stop doing that blank. Trust me. And then you also make Twitter and Instagram responsible for that blank. What, you going to have a public fight club? So, she's talked about this before. And what I appreciate here is that she's saying, look, the platform itself is also to blame. They let this stuff go on. She says, I understand you got free speech. I get it. But there has to be some guidelines when you let blank spread like that. So, and she says what blank is wrong with people. And this honestly is a result of our society being an unhealthy society. So I agree with Leslie Jones on this point, that you've got to hold the platforms responsible for this kind of stuff. And the fact is, you have to separate the tares from the wheat. You have to separate what is real harassment out there from people who just have a different point of view. And stop assuming that you know what is motivating every little tweet and every little Facebook post. And stop looking for ghosts and goblins behind all of these things and hidden meanings. Because I will tell you one thing about the flamers and the trolls. They're not subtle. Okay? They're not subtle. If they're racist, it's going to be right out there. If they're sexist, it's going to be right out there. So rather than reading into it, they're going to make themselves very apparent. And we do have to hold the platforms, I think, responsible. So the question is, do you engage or don't you engage? Here's another story. This is from Wired, and this is with former Mythbusters host Carrie Byron. And she was talking about what you do in situations where you're being trolled online. And she says the minute you engage with a troll, that's when it's going to go bad. Just let it go. No matter how offended you are, let it go. Just if I came into the industry right now, just fresh onto the internet, I think it would crush my spirits because it can be so vicious. But I started slow with some Craigslist-y kind of message boards, and I got to build my way up to being able to ignore the awful people. It's a strange world that you can't handle your characters in movies. She goes, this is just crazy. So she's talking about, there's two different tacks here. She's saying just ignore this stuff. And Leslie Jones takes it a step further and says, rather than engaging, don't take it personally and let the platform, you screen cap this shot, put this stuff, put it out there. Let everyone know what these creeps are saying about you and hold the platform accountable. I think both pieces of advice are very good. And, personally, I would like to see Kelly Marie Tran or her publicist, her agent, somebody come out here and put an end to all the speculation. And if she really did leave because of harassment, come out there and say that. Instead of letting people flounder and all of these accusations bounce all around the internet, because we still don't have any confirmation that that's the reason that she left social media, or in this case, Instagram. And what it's done is it's provided this narrative for mainstream journalists to come out and cast this giant, ugly shadow over Star Wars fans. And I got to tell you, Jim, you and I, we know we've been in the trenches of fandom for a long time, been to a lot of conventions and interacted with a lot of different fans. And I've never met anybody that matches the description of the way that these fans are being depicted. Now, I do see screen caps. I do see evidence of some pretty ugly, vicious people online, but I can't say that they speak for Star Wars fans, even a fraction of Star Wars fans. I just don't see it.
Yes, this is very true, Jason. And the thing that really disturbs me a lot about this story is with Leslie Jones, you can find many, many examples online of people who did take screenshots of people impersonating Leslie via social media and doing all kind of crazy stuff. But unfortunately, with the Kelly Marie Tran thing, all we have is a Wikipedia comment, and that's the only thing I've ever actually seen. Now, by me saying this, it doesn't mean I am saying racism doesn't exist, and I'm not saying let's empower racists and give them a platform to speak from. As a matter of fact, I think if people are watching Kelly Marie Tran's social media so closely, they would have been making a lot of noise about this a long time ago. But all we have is a mysterious Wikipedia comment that a 12-year-old could have made. Anyone could go in and edit Wikipedia at any given time. You don't have to have an account. You don't have to sign in. Whether or not your comments exist for more than a few minutes depends on how closely the mods are watching that site. But Wikipedia itself has been embroiled in controversies in the past. Let me just point out to the fact that they're a website that has an entire web page dedicated to Ayla Secura's breast. Okay, so I don't want to hear about tolerance from Wikipedia. As a matter of fact, that's something I spoke out about them years ago, and they never did anything but antagonize other fans on social media. I stood with those fans. A lot of those fans have now turned their pitchforks on us, but you know that's the way the ball rolls. That's okay. Yeah. We'll take the bullets. Yeah. Again, no way are we saying that open racism on social media or in face-to-face encounters or anywhere in the world is acceptable or permissible ever? And we are not trying to protect anyone by asking the Star Wars creators to stop feeding the trolls. We are not saying that in order to protect them. Is on the other side of the coin altogether, we are saying that to take away their power. By feeding the trolls, you are empowering them.
One thing I can tell you is that the various social media platforms, they have acquired personalities of their own. And the personality of Twitter is not a good one. It's not a good one. So if you're a journalist out there and you're going to write about the state of the Star Wars fandom in 2018 for sci-fi.com, and you're basing it solely on what's going on in the Twitter sphere, you think that's really the best pulse? I see all these stories. What's wrong with fandom? Toxic masculinity, toxic fandom. Star Wars has got a white male problem. Star Wars has got this problem. And it all comes from Twitter. What about going to the floor of Star Wars Celebration? Go to the floor of Star Wars Celebration and see if you see anything resembling what's going on behind these masked, anonymous, sock puppet, fake, phony BS accounts run by children. Go to Star Wars Celebration, see if you see any examples of that. You won't see any of it. You know what you'll see? You see a bunch of people sleeping outside like hobos just to get a glimpse of the next movie. That's what you'll see.
But you'll also see a warm atmosphere of people from all different races, ages, countries, cities, cultures, all coming together to celebrate, celebrate their passion for Star Wars. That's all I've ever seen at these events. So, there's a lot going on right now. And we've been under attack. People are going after us just for merely voicing our opinions about this stuff. Because and the only reason we're talking about, we don't want to talk about this. We want to talk about the color of lightsabers. We want to talk about the latest books and comics. We don't want to be doing this. We don't want to be having this discussion. You think we enjoy this? This is terrible. But this is what's happening in front of us right now, and it's a very scary situation.
So anyway, we hope that, the days of us having to report on this are numbered. I hope so. This is not something that we want to do, but you have to look at reality square in the face. You have to admit there's a problem in order to solve the problem. And, I got to say, I believe Lucasfilm's stance on this is wrong. I think that Lucasfilm is fanning the flames. I think Lucasfilm is aligning themselves with a very narrow sliver of people that are more interested in activism and parading around as these, virtuous know-it-alls. And it doesn't look good. It's not flattering. And so they've got to fix this. And I believe they will fix it. I think they're on their way to fixing it, because you lose $80-100 million on a movie like they've done with Solo for no other reason. Because I believe Solo is a really great movie and a really great Star Wars movie for no other reason other than a tremendous erosion of trust, and you might even say a betrayal of a huge portion of the fan base when they say, hey, you know what? I don't have any obligation to you. I don't owe you anything.
We're not actually asking them for anything other than respect, because we're not asking them to abolish The Last Jedi. We're not asking them to fire anyone. We're just asking for respect to the fan base.
Yeah, and call it what it is, that the Star Wars fan base is what it always has been, which is a great community of people that share their passion for a central mythology that was created out of the mind of one guy, and that's George Lucas, and the rest of them are standing on his shoulders and trying to further this story that we all love so much. And yes, there are a few bad apples out there. There are a few bad actors. But when you make them out to be bigger and more powerful than they are, by giving them oxygen, by giving them air, by giving them publicity, then you get this counter movement that wants to come in and play the virtuous hero. And it's just, it leads to no good. It leads to no good, and it creates enemies out of people who should be friends. And it's just silly. And I will say, I think that there's a certain portion of fandom that has been hijacked by people that truly believe that they're Star Wars fans. They want to believe that they're Star Wars fans, but they're more interested in what Star Wars can be than what Star Wars has been and is. They want to remake Star Wars. They want it to fit within their particular very narrow worldview. And any objection to that is seen as being closed-minded and, lacking in some sort of virtue and all of that. And, let's hope that it comes to a swift end. I believe that it will. I think we're in just a cycle, and hopefully wiser heads will prevail and people will sort of give up this. Now, we do have, before we sign off here, this is an email that we received, and we're going to withhold names here for obvious reasons, but it's very, very important that we put this out there, because I think it does shed light on some of the problems that are happening. So, email says, hey, Jimmy and Jason, I've really enjoyed your discussion lately on the issue of Star Wars fans and the hateful comments of late. It is completely unacceptable. I am a Disney employee, and I don't want to even get into the person's title, because I don't want, folks to come after this person. I don't want to put their job in jeopardy. But let's just say that Jimmy Mack and I put the time and the research to verify that this person is indeed who they say they are. They are a Disney employee, and they're not, we're not talking about, the person making hot dogs at one of the parks. This is someone who is at a senior position. And he says Disney puts every employee, from the cast members at the parks to the highest level executives through training annually that includes how to handle our precious IP, harassment, and social media policy. These policies must be adhered by all, no exceptions, and are identical to the DC Comics you outline on your show. So we, Jim and I both shared, I think it was last week or maybe the week before, what social media policy they have over at DC Comics to prevent this kind of thing where you have the creators and the people behind an IP going out there and waging war against the fans. They continue why Lucasfilm is not following them, or why Lucasfilm is not following them, I don't know. My only guess is that they're relatively new to the company and have yet to be fully synergized. But it is truly sad to see how some who have the privilege to tell Star Wars stories treat the fans they are creating for. Thank you again for your honest look at the state of Star Wars. I should also clarify, I'm not sure how that applies to freelancers, independent contractors, but whether you're a full-time employee or not, you are expected to maintain a high level of professionalism on company-owned social accounts and personal accounts. We represent our company in everything we do. From the office to the grocery store, you will notice that you do not see creators from Disney Animation or Disney live-action studios behaving in this manner online. I truly believe Lucasfilm has not fully adopted the Disney policies, but I'm sure that will be changing really quickly. Thanks again for all you do for the Star Wars community. So I applaud the bravery and the sentiment behind this email. Again, we did do our research to verify this person is who they say they are, and it all makes sense. Jim, this is all we're asking for. That's all we're asking for is some level-headedness, some class, some dignity. Let the fans fight among themselves for good, for worse. We'll police ourselves. Mm-hmm. But there needs to be a different road taken by those that are associated with the brand.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're asking for patience. We're asking for professionalism, tact, and respect. Because if respect comes down from the top to all fans, then fans might start acting more respectfully to one another. It all starts at the top. It really does. Well, let's try to go out on some kind of upbeat thing. Do we have a voicemail we could listen to or something to get us out of this muck we're in?
Oh yeah. Let's see. What do we got here? How about? How about this? This is Dean. He's a brand new listener to the show. Let's see what he has to say.
Hi, guys. Hey, this is Dean Bibb, and I'm a relatively new listener to the podcast. I've been listening to it about 6 months. Thank you so much for the podcast. It's awesome. Hey, I wanted to acknowledge a scene in Solo, a Star Wars story. It's during the Kessel gunfight, and it's something, they filmed something that I don't think any of us have ever seen in any of the Star Wars movies, and it stood out to me. In all of the Star Wars movies, we'll see characters running up the ramp of the Millennium Falcon, or we'll see them getting ready to go down. But we've never seen someone actually walking up through the ramp. And they showed us that in Rebel Force Radio, that great shot of Han shooting down the ramp past the camera as he walks backwards, up the ramp. That's a shot that we've never seen in any of any of the Star Wars media. And I just thought it was really neat, and it stood out to me, and it's actually my favorite visual from Solo, a Star Wars story. I just wondered what you guys thought about that, if you had thought about it, and what your take on it is. I just really think it's a unique shot from a fan standpoint. Anyway, keep up the good work on the podcast. I really enjoyed it. It gets me through my overnight work shifts. So thanks, guys. Take care.
Oh, that's the kind of stuff we love to hear. Thank you, Dean. Appreciate it, and don't work too hard, okay? I will say I did not notice that specific shot, but in general, I felt like there were moments where I was seeing more of the Falcon than I've ever seen before. I really got more of a sense of how it all lays out. It felt more like a place that you could live on. And I did appreciate all the different vantage points that I believe we hadn't seen before. That particular idea of Han sort of fending off the bad guys and kind of walking up the ramp. Jim, is that something that stuck out to you? Do you remember that particular shot?
Like you, Jason.
And is it being unique?
Well, like you, Jason, I'm seeing things in parts of the Falcon and going into these little places that we've never been in before. But I seem to think that we kind of got a good shot up the ramp at the end of the Last Jedi. When Rey turns around and she's having her last vision of Kylo Ren and she closes that ramp, it might not be exactly like the shot that our caller was talking about, which I also seem to recall. But I definitely need to go see Solo again. I've only seen it twice, so it's here in the neighborhood, like I said. So I'm gonna go and see that film again tomorrow, and I will keep my eyes open for any sort of extra cool looks at that ramp. I'll tell you, that ramp up into the Falcon, it sort of means something to me because as a kid playing with the Millennium Falcon toy with the action figures, the ramp could lower. And you could have some extended moments there on the ramp, Han's going up the ramp following Chewie, and then he turns around and opens up his blaster on Greedo and then goes back up the ramp. And so I felt like I was in that environment back then when I was a kid. So to be able to spend a little more time with it, with Alden's Han in Solo, I think I can recall the shot he's talking about, but it's just not really part of my memory yet as much as the other films are because I haven't seen it 500 times yet. So, but these are the things that matter to us as Star Wars fans, It's not like, what's your political affiliation on Twitter? No, it's like, hey, let's hang out on the ramp of the Falcon for a little while and, get comfortable here. Let's sit down and maybe even have a beer here or something. But it's just, these are the things that really excite me as a Star Wars fan to think about the nooks and crannies of the universe, and the ramp leading up into the Falcon is definitely one of those places.
Chewie, get us out of